Been recording.
Good afternoon, everybody. It is Thursday, getting closer to Labor Day, and I can't even believe that. I don't know what happened to summer. I never got the memo that the pool was open or anything, so maybe it's not really true. But I notice the days are getting shorter. When you leave here at 8:30, it's darker outside, and it's like, oh, crap. I wish that wasn't the case. We have some topics again to talk about, and we're gonna study the generational differences. We're gonna watch some people's opinions on that, and we're gonna translate that into management things that we need to do to better connect with differing age groups that we have in the workplace. We're sure gonna do that tonight. We are gonna finish up on the Titanic presentations. Half of you were done, and the other half are still in front of us, and we'll do that. And then we're gonna start the conversation on talent acquisition and retention. And that's a topic that will bleed over into the next class as well. I've got a couple of handouts that you have that are essentially advertisements for Gallup polls and Gallup consulting work that they do. And I'm not promoting or not promoting Gallup as an organization. I've worked with Gallup and I've worked with clients that are working with Gallup, and they have some pretty impressive things that they can bring to the table. They are expensive, and in a Utah frame, they're quite expensive, but they serve a great purpose, and they share a lot of their data in books that they publish and in information that they make available to the rest of the world that aren't paying clients. And we're going to take a little sneak look into some of the things that Gallup is discovering and publishing on the workplace. And I'm not promoting that we go up and sign up to buy Gallup services. If your company is healthy enough and wealthy enough to do that, you would have a great experience. They are a good organization. Their concepts are sound. A number of the books that we've referred to in this class are written by either current or former Gallup researchers and employees. They've contributed a lot to the world of business, and I believe in quite a few of the things. We talked about the Gallup Q12 in the leadership class that some of you sat in, and we'll touch on that again on the topic of retention, because retention is something that we work on and we think about, and human resource departments is scored on retention, employee retention. But in reality, retention or lack of retention is a symptom of a deeper problem. You don't address retention, you address why people want to leave. And so engagement, employee engagement is really what Gallup turns us to and say, how do we get people turned on about their job? How do we get people excited about the work that they have to do, at least most of the time? You know, we're all gonna have our days, and we're all gonna have the jobs that, you know, the day that the toilet backs up, you know, it's not every day, but when it does, you gotta address it. And it's not your good day, but you know, you still address those things, and for the most part, we can be engaged if we're in an organization that has that as part of the culture. So we're gonna talk about that as well. So I think that those three topics will take us through the clock that I can't see. I maybe fix that at break time. I'll reinstall the congratulations poster one side or the other, so we can see the clock, or so that I can see the clock. You guys can see that clock, and we all have them on our cell phones. But I'll try not to be too obvious about going into overtime or missing break. Larry, you can keep me and still your job and make sure I don't miss the break time. So I think maybe we'll start out continuing our conversations about the Titanic. Andrew's presentation sent me on a little bit of a chase of something I'd never heard before, and all the people that I've heard presentations on root cause analysis. I've heard conspiracies and that kind of things, but not really quite the way you spun it out. And so that was interesting to me.
Did you find anything?
Anything
I
different?
won't share yet.
Okay.
I maybe, I don't know, it's an interesting, it's a very, very interesting topic, and it brings to me, questions of ownership of the dive team that's, mining the wreck. Is that really, do they have license to do that? Cause if it's a switcheroo, they don't, it's like the insurance company buys your wrecked, your totaled vehicle. If the VIN number's wrong, they don't have title. They don't own that. They can't, so I don't know. That was a question that came into my mind, popped into my mind. Hold your hand up if you still have to give a presentation on the Titanic. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, 5 and 5, it's exactly where we ought to be. So the 5 of you can, rock, paper, scissors, or whatever it is that you wanna do to go first. Do I have a volunteer? Eric, you're up.
So basically mine was a lot of stuff about the same stuff everybody else found. There was 2 things that I found that I didn't hear anybody talk about. At least one of them I know for sure, but one of them was that there was a coal fire down by the furnaces that spontaneously combusted, I guess, right after they left port. And then I guess to contain those, what they do is they put more coal into the furnaces to get control of the coal fire, which made the Titanic apparently go faster. At least that was one of the reasons they say it was going faster. And then the other one, I actually found that there's a conspiracy theory that a German U-boat actually sunk the Titanic, and there was, I guess, 7 sailors on watch that said they saw an unidentified vessel about 5 to 6 miles away until about 2 a.m. And then there was reports of some survivors when they were in the boats of seeing a searchlight from another boat that was a boat that never showed up and came to rescue them. They thought it was the Californian, but the captain of the Californian actually said that it wasn't him because he was stuck in an ice floe about until daylight or something like that. But other than that, I basically found all the same stuff everybody else did.
Okay, our objective, we don't have to find new stuff, those of you that are yet to go, it's, the objective really is to find out root cause analysis. If you draw the same conclusions others drew, then that tells me we're on track, to something, so, root cause in your opinion?
I honestly think it was a big part of it was the binoculars, not being able to use the binoculars. Because I actually looked up that David Blair guy, and there was 2 other incidences that he was on a ship that ran aground too, and he was actually to blame for that because he was the navigator. And then there was one other incident that it talked about, but I honestly think it was him not skipping that key for the binoculars.
So that's very interesting, isn't it, that a
Yeah.
tool, such a simple tool really in a way, it's like, it's like when you're flying, if your altimeter goes out, you're in the blind a little bit. And
Yeah.
if you don't have your binoculars that you rely on to see at distance, that's certainly problematic. And even though it was at night, we all know, we live in bright skies, but we all know when we get into dark skies, it's never pitch black. I mean, you always can eventually become like a cat and see more than you think you would see. And sometimes it's just, there's shadows. I mean, you can see shadows created from the starlight, and that's pretty crazy. So binoculars, the visibility.
Yeah, and I also just think that David Blair guy is really bad luck. Because I looked him up and it was like a bunch of weird stuff that happened when he was on boats.
Really,
So, yeah, it was pretty weird.
that's kind of crazy. Maybe he's a bad dude,
Yeah, that's what I think.
What'd you have to say?
I was reading through that too, and they had binoculars where the helm was, so why didn't they just pass them off? I mean, what did they need them for more than the guys in the crow's nest needed them for? I
That's
didn't
interesting.
understand that. And why not just, if the guy took the key, you just break the box or whatever it's in, and
Yeah,
right.
why would you not?
pick the lock, break the lock. One of the passengers had probably better binoculars than they did anyway.
Or try to pick the lock, they couldn't have been that difficult back then.
No, they couldn't have. Yeah, that's an interesting thing, so.
So if other binoculars were available, I just don't see why, there's 2 men in the nest, one of them goes and gets the binoculars while
Of course,
the other
it's
keeps
easy to
following.
say that when you know you're gonna hit an iceberg.
Well,
But, if
right.
they
But
think
they
they're
know
south
the
of.
territory, right? So they know there's the potential is very high.
Yeah, although they thought they were south of it, a little bit,
Yeah,
maybe,
yeah.
they were pretty much just straight east of New York City. You know, when you look at the maps, you see Nova Scotia there, but, you know, they were pretty far south, when you really look at their latitude, and, that's interesting. Who's going next? Thank you, Eric. Okay, Callie?
So I mostly found the same stuff that everyone else did, but I found a couple of weirder ones that are not very believable, but they're conspiracy theories. So, the first one, this one's kind of believable. It says that the ship was designed with like 16 watertight compartments on the bottom of it, and so those compartments, if the ship were to start sinking, they could fill up with water and it would still stay afloat. But people say that they think it would have been better off without the compartments because it would have filled up evenly. But since they were watertight, it only filled up like half of them, and then it was like all messed up. I didn't get much information on that one. And then there's another one about an underwater UFO. Some people believe that there was an underwater UFO that shot lasers at the Titanic. A scientist named, I can't even say his name, claims that they discovered 3 large holes underneath the ship, which they think came from an attack by underwater aliens. And they also claim that the ships lost radio contact with, like, the ships nearby lost radio contact with the Titanic, so they think that it was aliens. Another one was about time travelers. Neil deGrasse Tyson said, "It's been rumored that the reason why the Titanic sank was because in the future they invented a time machine and everyone wanted to go back to the Titanic to see the iceberg, but it overloaded and it sank."
That's awesome.
And then I found another website that said that time travelers weren't tourists, but they were spies hired by J.P. Morgan to sabotage the ship to collide with the iceberg in order to claim insurance. And then I found the one about the German U-boats as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't get much information on that one.
So if you smoke enough weed, you
Save the transaction.
you can come up with something really good. But you know, we laugh at those things, and yet there's unexplainable evidence. If there were 3 holes in a 1-inch steel plate, you guys know how hard and how long it takes to put a hole in a 1-inch plate. If you got a sharp punch, it goes fairly quick. But in 1909, they didn't have sharp punches; they drilled them out or cut them with a torch. And either way, a 1-inch plate's going to take a minute to cut. So if they found evidence of holes in a 1-inch plate, were those holes there when the ship left England or Ireland? You know, don't know. There is something that's a question. Or did those plates actually come from the Titanic? Were they, or were they on board the Titanic as steel supply they were using as scrap to cut down in case they needed to, you know, fix stuff while the ship was at journey? We don't know the answers to those things. We don't even for sure know the answer to the UFO thing. You know, we have our personal points of view on that, whether that's in the realm of possibility or not. But it's interesting when we have something that is really not understood. How do we get to root causes of things that aren't understood? In our businesses, we have these kinds of things all the time where a weird anomaly occurs, you know, and we don't jump to the conclusion that it's a UFO hovering over the building, but we do this, you know, we call it a glitch in the software. We call it, you know, things that go on that we don't understand why it happens. If you've ever used QuickBooks, you all are familiar with glitches in the software and anomalies that go wrong and postings and things that happen that you don't understand how or why they happen. And I'm not dissing on QuickBooks, I'm just saying it's a commonly used program that people have common anomalies that they go, wow, how did that happen? And we don't know. And in a root cause analysis, we can't fix it until we figure out what happened, right? That's the common thing here. From a problem-solving perspective or from a business perspective, we can't fix any of this stuff until we get to the root cause. And if we react to an unproven root cause, we're going to spend an awful lot of money on UFO detectors on the Titanic, and we're going to go, you know, that may be valuable and it may be wasted money, right? The UFO detector salesman will convince us that it's the right equipment for the job, and maybe we'll buy it, maybe we won't. But if it's the wrong root cause, it won't matter whether we buy it or we don't. We're fixing the wrong thing. And we see companies do that. We see UDOT doing that. We see, traffic patterns altered and just made worse somewhere else by UDOT in an experiment to try to increase traffic flow. Because we don't know a lot of times what the root cause are of traffic backups and traffic delays. And so the study of traffic is an engineering topic, right? And figuring out root cause on those things is just as viable as figuring out root cause on why you've got bubbles in the stain or why you've got a mismeasurement on an I-beam. These are all root cause analysis that's required. Denver, you started to present yours, and Callie, I gave her the floor, so you're on.
So I found a few things. One was whenever the ship was sinking, a lot of people apparently were kind of looking through the window, their windows of their rooms, which then, after it started sinking more and more water was able to come in, which then made it sink a lot faster. And I guess the watertight doors too. At first you kind of think that the watertight doors are going to help it more because it's watertight doors, right? But it really made it uneven and sink more and more if it was, like she said, if it was water was able to come in and it would be more evenly flown. Another one that I found was right before they left, apparently they shuffled around the officers and who was in charge and stuff like that, and he had said it with the binoculars. The previous officers were going to give him the key for the binoculars, which is kind of, right, I agree with him, or I think that was the root cause of the one big reason why they probably sank was, if you just had binoculars, you can obviously see an iceberg in front of you. Also, it was said that they were going too fast. The boat, the Titanic was going too fast. So when they started to realize, oh hey, there's an iceberg in front of us, they couldn't stop or go in a different direction because it's such a big boat, obviously, and they were just going too fast that they just, once they tried to start to put the brakes on, it was just too late. Those are the few things that I found on there.
They got brakes on that?
I'm more of a car guy, so I'm not a boat guy.
Yeah, that's an expression, right? Yeah, you have to do that. So you're kind of agreeing that the lack of visibility, binocular, the range of visibility was a primary contributing factor.
Oh yeah,
to
for
the
sure.
root cause.
I mean, I get why the officer probably didn't really, I forget what his name was, but I could see why he probably didn't think about it too much, because it's the binoculars, like, oh, I can figure it out, that's such a big boat, why do I need binoculars? But obviously that's, again, in my opinion, probably why they sank.
We wind up getting ourselves fooled into lots of things, like it's a safe boat.
Yeah.
It's touted as the safest ship ever built. I'm a passenger on it. They charge a lot of money. Of course, they checked it out. This is exciting. This isn't dangerous. And then the guys that are working the binoculars, and this is what, their 12th night at sea, or I don't remember how many nights it was, but it wasn't the beginning of the trip, and they've been doing it, and all of them have been doing it in a career in other ships, and they've been doing Atlantic passages for some of them their whole career. That's what they've done, is back and forth, and on different smaller ships, cargo ships and other kinds of ships. So they weren't new at navigating. They weren't new at iceberg fields. They weren't new at being a lookout in the middle of the night. They were skilled at that. They were, but just adds, we're safe, we're okay. Let our guard down just a little bit. And I think that corporately, that's another thing that we get ourselves into as a trap, is that we think that it's a new machine, it can't go wrong. Well, new machines do fail, and it's a seasoned employee, it can't go wrong. Well, seasoned employees make mistakes, and the perfect storm that we talked about last class is kind of what you're talking about here to some extent. But the idea that I'm not ever gonna need the flotation device that I'm sitting on an airplane. I so far have never needed it, but we all can look at the news and see passengers that did, passengers that survived, and you know, they had to slide down the big inflatable slide out the exit door, and they followed the lighting that's on the floor that the flight attendants tell us about, and we don't pay attention to that anymore. You know, we've heard it before, it's not gonna happen to us, and that was certainly contributing to some people's death on the night of the Titanic. How many, I don't know. You know your exit route. You know, do you always know and repeat to the people that you are staying with in a hotel room, do you say, where's the exit door? If you've got a wife and kids or people that you love in that room, make sure you say it out loud. If you can't see anything, where's the exit door? It's out this door and it's 3 doors to the left. Or whatever it is, talk it out loud, because the probability of one of us being in a hotel fire this year is higher than you would think. And I've worked for companies that spent time on that and taught us survival of hotel fires, and any given year we would have 1, 2, or 3 employees that were in a hotel. I've been in several, and you know, you don't think it will happen, and they weren't tragic, they didn't burn the hotel down or anything like that, but we had to get out, and some people, you know, were pretty naked on their way out, you know, because they weren't ready for it to be a real fire, not a fire drill. People think that, it's just a fire drill. Well, it's the room next to them that's on fire, and the firemen are chopping down their door, and however they are, they pull them out of the room and, you know, grab your bag, you know, and so that's amusing if they live through it. It's not amusing if they die of smoke inhalation. So anyway, don't be lulled into the fact that safety doesn't matter. Wow, we don't need the binoculars in the crow's nest tonight. If that's like not wearing your safety glasses when you make that next cut, right? It's never gonna happen, but just as sure as you don't wear your safety glasses, it will, right? That's just the way it happens. It's not something that we expect. So the culture has to be, you don't go up in the crow's nest without the binoculars. At least 3 or 4 of you in the room have thought the binoculars were key so far. We have 2 more presenting. Josie and Brendan, do you want to go?
Yeah.
Okay, Brendan, you held out the last. Well done.
I think that the root cause was human incompetence. So it was like building up from construction to like people not having binoculars to not putting enough their lifeboats on there because it would ruin the view. Like, I feel like that's the reason that it became as tragic as it did, is mainly because of how it was handled and the prolonged, like, putting aside safety in that way.
So this was a repeated theme that you're noticing and that you're reporting on. Okay?
So just like little things being missed or ignored, thought to be less important than other things, and ended up killing those people. But
So if the ship collides with an iceberg and survives a collision, doesn't matter if you have lifeboats or not, right? Because the ship's not going down. But if you collide with the iceberg and the ship goes down, then the lifeboat count matters. But if you're in an unsinkable ship, that's what the headline said, this is an unsinkable ship. Before the people had all bought their tickets and were on board. So you're on an unsinkable ship, so it must be an unsinkable ship. So, what does it matter if we have all the lifeboats or not? They just couldn't change the name on the other lifeboats, right? That was the problem. They were
Probably why they only had that many lifeboats on there, because they couldn't switch them all.
They
ran out of time.
Yeah, had to go. Gotta go. Come on, and it's okay. It's unsinkable.
Right.
All right, Brendan, what's your? Thank you, Josie.
So I found something weird, but I kind of think that it was somebody's, like one person's fault, because I saw something about how they said, I don't remember what their terms were for left and right, but somebody said turn left or something, turn right, and I'm like, that's your only job, is to understand 2 terms. fake. So I was like, and so I was gonna follow that somebody steered the wrong way, but then she brought up the aliens, so I think I'm gonna go with that one. My reasoning for it going down. But yeah, I saw that, and then just everything else, because if you Google anything about it sinking, it's all about, you know, how it's constructed, basically everything everybody else brought up.
Yeah.
So I tried to find some different stuff, but
Okay. Well, the goal wasn't always to find different stuff. I appreciate those of you who did, because that's quite entertaining. The possibility that some of it's correct is, just because I laugh doesn't mean it's not true, right? There is a possibility that weird things added up, and I'm not gonna propose that. Jake bailed the helmsman out by saying the gear, he turned correctly, but the gear was backwards or something.
Yeah, it was a new steering system from what I found on both of those boats, and so yeah, it's one guy's job, but when he's used to his whole career, like you were saying, doing it a specific way, and the gear and the steering controls all look the same and stuff like that, but it's reversed or something new. You have to pull this or yank that while you're doing it. The boat goes the wrong direction.
And that can happen. Any of you that are motorcycle aficionados may attest to this. I had a pretty bad motorcycle wreck one time. I was in Ireland and I was living there at the time, and somebody had an older Norton motorcycle. It was a street bike, and it was a nice bike. I thought even though it was older, it was in good shape and stuff. But for 1 year, Norton had reversed the controls. The clutch was on the right, the brake was on the left. And in an emergency situation, I couldn't do that one. and I dropped the bike and wrecked it because I was going for the brakes and hit the clutch, and that didn't help. So the reverse controls or whatever, I could see that as a possibility. But I like Brendan's explanation. Even if it was, you had two things you needed to know, and so get those two things right. That's kind of a funny way to look at it. Well, if you go back at some point and look, and I will pass you all off, by the way, for doing the research and coming up with a hypothesis of the root cause. And so therefore you get credit for the midterm exam of root cause analysis of the Titanic. Speaking of which, I want to pass a paper around. If you would please, I'll put a pen with this. If you would please check in, we have a few assignments this module, and people, because Canvas has been difficult for us to work with. Everybody hasn't posted stuff up on Canvas. Many of you texted me and attached it to text. Many of you emailed things and attached it to an email. I want to make sure that I haven't missed anybody's work in giving you credit for what you have turned in. So I'm going to pass a paper around, everybody's name on it, and just be honest if you've turned any of these. 3 of these assignments haven't been assigned. You're not expected to have done them. And the ones that have been assigned, the only one that really has a drop-dead deadline was the Titanic. And you've all completed that. So 100% of you are checked off or will be checked off on the Titanic. So I'm going to pass this around and ask you to put a check mark in the boxes of what work you know you've done and turned in, so that I can correlate that. And if I don't have a copy of what, I'm going to look for what it was that you turned in. Make sure I don't want to miss anything. So if you would do that while we're talking, we'll pass this around and make sure it gets back to me. I would appreciate that. Thank you. So if you look at the syllabus, at the assignment, when you have the syllabus open at some point in time, this assignment was under our discussion of corporate culture. And I think of everybody's presentation, many of you touched on the idea. Andrew, you talked about the finance aspect of it, of the financial backer of the entire organization, J.P. Morgan and his buddies and cronies and business associates that were part of what is now known as the International Monetary Fund, right? I mean, we're talking about wealth that was wealth in the 1900, Vanderbilt and Rockefeller and all of those families, Morgan. They're still controlling dollars in our world. I mean, those same families, not the same people, but the same families. And to what extent, there's conspiracy theories on that too. I won't go there, but the International Monetary Fund is not a theory. That's an organization that is real, that's funded by consortiums of governments. And the idea is to keep the world's economy a little more stable than if we had random issuance of wealth in different countries. And so whether they're working well or not, I don't know.
What's the negotiation?
The negotiation one is the exercises that you did on all of you did negotiation.
Okay.
You broke off into groups and presented on what your results were. We did that one in class. Thank you for clarifying. Any other questions, let me know, and make sure you get clarified on that. Yes, sir.
Was there anything we were supposed to actually like bring to you?
On this one, you're making a presentation in class on the Titanic.
But no, like
Yeah, there's a SWOT analysis that we'll need, and if you haven't done it yet, you can catch up. I'll talk to you about what you need to do on that. Same with everybody else. There's no, if there's something that you misunderstood or didn't get to, talk to me and we'll get you cleared up to make sure
The
you.
SWOT analysis you did in a team and then just one person.
I've got you guys signed off on your SWOT analysis.
I was just letting him know because he
Oh.
might have forgotten that.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, it was, yeah, you were on a team with Callie, maybe, I can't remember whose team you were on, that was longer ago than I care to remember at this point in time. I'm worried about today, getting through one at a time. So, one of the things that I really believe was at blame in the Titanic incident, Andrew talked about a little bit of it, of the control of the financiers, and how often does our business make bad decisions based on finances, especially as a company lurches through cash flow problems. Most of us have been fairly distant from cash flow problems. Those of you that are working directly in the finance of an organization understand that Walmart has moments of cash flow problems. Their numbers are just bigger. They have never gotten to the point where they were unable to get financing and stay afloat. Therefore, they're still Walmart. And I'm not saying that their cash position is in jeopardy right now. But Walmart gets hit with 75 lawsuits per day. And so that means if you just take that to the next step, that means there are 75 trials or negotiated agreements per day for a company the size of Walmart. And some of those are serious. Some of them aren't. Some of them are class action and more big dollars. And so when you're managing cash, a company like Walmart doesn't know when they're going to get hit with a $100 million settlement requirement. That did happen with health and beauty aid employees in a class action suit for Walmart. And they had to go back retroactively and pay a bunch of people a differential. That was an enormous amount of money. And so managing cash, you just never know what's going to happen to company. You think everything's going smooth, and then boom, you get some sort of curveball. So all companies have to manage cash, and cash management is in fact part of the topic of our 2 modules from now that we're going to be spending a lot of time talking about budgeting and driving cash and understanding from a department perspective, understanding from a business owner's perspective. But it clearly impacted the Titanic. There were expenses in building, there were expenses in repairing the crashed ship, the sister ship, and you brought those out, Andrew, in your presentation, and you called it insurance fraud, and so there was potentially other things. Yes.
I was just wondering, what was the big rush to fix that ship when the Titanic was the big deal that was happening? What was the rush to put anything off, or take people from Titanic and put them over on that ship? Or it just doesn't even make any sense why they made that other ship a priority when this was the huge deal.
I have a theory. I'll tell you. What in your research did you come across that?
I didn't come across that, but
I mean, they put off the Titanic a month because of that other ship, but why? It makes zero sense.
So they
whether-
spent, both of the ships were fairly new, and they had just invested a large amount of money into building these ships, and now they've got a ship where they're not making any money on, and they've got half a ship already built where they can rob Peter to pay Paul to get this ship back in the water to start making income off of it. And we have done that where we've got two jobs that are similar coming through, and then we have a problem with this job that's gonna take a couple hours to get fixed. Well, we've got a replacement part right here. Let's just grab that piece, and then we can wait for the return piece on this other item.
Yeah.
That way this piece doesn't have to wait any longer than it already has.
I think that's a good theory on what happened, and the why is, I think, my personal opinion on this is that there's another factor, and that was the fact of marketing secrecy. They don't want to admit to the world they got a problem, and we're still all kind of that way, you know, how long before they actually shut the doors did Kmart signal that they were gonna go out of business? We could see it between the lines going to this store here locally. Inventories are shrinking, shelves are empty, employee morale is in the tank. There's not signs of more advertising. You see signs that of companies struggling, but they didn't announce it. They didn't say, well, we're gonna go out of business in 2 years or 1 year or anything like that. They just all of a sudden shut the door. And so companies try to operate in secrecy like that a lot of times. And I'm quite sure that was driving J.P. Morgan's ego as well. He didn't want to be associated investment-wise with a problem. And so when they said, we can fix this problem, he's probably going, okay, great, let's get it back and going. You know, it was a matter of public record that they'd had a little bump in the harbor. You know, they'd bumped into another, but it wasn't announced to be a total, as much damage as it was. In fact, I don't think they knew how much damage it was until they actually had it. But
They
when
just
you
wanted
think,
to hurry and save face with that before they left the harbor.
that's
with
my
the
guess,
Titanic.
is that they wanted to save face, that they, you know, that it was no big deal, we got it fixed, we're back in business, and they don't want people that are buying tickets
To
for,
panic or
you know,
anything.
to be, oh, no, let's wait, you know, let's hold off. I think they wanted confidence in the public. But I don't know that for sure. I wanted to back up to the root cause though. So money, I think, was put on the table as a potential root cause, right? And Josie put a second thing on the table that I think is correct. I would agree most with you on that as far as the other causes. It doesn't matter because none of us know, and it's just an opinion with all of us. But there was a corporate culture issue that was in that organization, and it was woven to some degree around money. A culture that would allow the substitution of iron rivets for steel rivets. The theory pretty much is, from a materials perspective, that had the rivets been, half of them were, but had the rivets at the point of impact been the stronger, better rivets, they wouldn't have sheared off. And only 6 plates came off the Titanic only. I don't remember their size, but they sheared the rivets off and the plates just popped off. And that let in a lot of water. But when you look at the size of that ship, that wasn't necessarily at the beginning such a huge hole. And from a design perspective, after there's catastrophe already, we talked about various things. It was interesting that the compartments that were watertight and didn't let water in, therefore became the light part of the ship, and that was the back end of the ship, and it goes up in the air and breaks the ship in half, right? Because you've got the sheer weight of that, all of that mass hanging up out of the water, it snaps the ship and further doomed it. But that's not a root cause. That's an incidental cause. But back to the root cause that Josie was talking about is that that culture allowed a substitution of a substandard material. That's problematic of an organization from a management going against their engineering department. When we see a company's management and marketing team going against an engineering department, time out. We need to get to the bottom of that from a management perspective. That's generally not okay. The engineers generally have some basis for what their concerns are. And they generally have to do with, product integrity. Whether it's, a pharmaceutical company with a drug release, we see the scientists going, no, not yet, hold on, we gotta solve this thing. And the marketing people are going, hey, get out there and buy this stuff. We see the scientists at Morton Thiokol saying the O-rings are not good at 29 degrees at launch. We will potentially have a failure. The scientists said no. And the marketing department goes, tell NASA we'll go ahead and launch in the morning. And they did, and we all know the result of that. The space shuttle blew up. And it really ended the program. And so when marketing or business administration doesn't listen to what engineering is telling them, if you see that in an organization that you're in, try to call time out and say, hold on, let's get to the bottom of this. We may be getting into a Titanic ship sinking on us. Because this discussion about lowering the bulkheads, I'm not a ship engineer. I don't know the science of that. We heard two reasons. One was to provide more room in first class cabins. Another one was to provide a stairway. I think, Larry, you brought that up, that they needed clearance for this grand stairway going into the dining room or ballroom or bar or whatever it was, And so back in that day, they didn't have the same 3D modeling that we have. And so we can make changes in structural design pretty quick and run it through SolidWorks and see what the load strains are on the beams and have it all calculated out by tomorrow morning. The Titanic couldn't do that. So if they're looking at lowering bulkheads, that's a big design change. And once that iteration had been accepted, you couldn't just say, well, let's just lower this one where the stairway is at and seal it up on either side of the stairway, make a bigger chamber. They just said the easiest solution is to go all the way across the ship that way, and they became 8 feet instead of whatever it was that were originally designed. But the point is, they didn't seal anything. They got, went over the top of it. We can look at it in retrospect and say it's a design problem, but once again, we have a culture in management that says we're going to let marketing sell their stairway, and we're going to compromise what the engineers are recommending in the bulkheads. That's a problem. That's a red flag to me. That says that, the engineering, the stairway's nice. First class cabins are nice, but somebody said they didn't even sell out all the first class cabins on this first voyage.
That was me.
Is that, I'm looking at Jake, that was you that did that. And so the marketing team should not be calling the shots for the organization. The CEO ultimately has to make the decision, but the CEO should make it with the basis of science as a firm foundation. And as Josie pointed out, management was overriding other people in the organization, and there was a culture of, you had a word for it, what did you say, bullying, or what did you say, culture of incompetence. Okay, that's even better. Yeah, of the wrong people making the decisions where the right people knew what needed to be done. The guy in the crow's nest knew he needed binoculars. But at his pay grade and rank, if he'd vandalized the ship, JP'd probably take it out of his pay, right? There was another cultural thing that you guys brought out that I think was part of the culture of the organization. I think you talked about Marconi and the subcontracting communication company. They were driving communication as a revenue source. It's like, this is the it's like you go on a cruise and you buy this cheap $500 cruise to Cabo San Lucas from St. George, but they got all the add-ons. When you get on the ship, you want anything to drink? The add-on was, you want to send a message back home? Of course you do. You got to brag. Hey, wish you were here. No, they don't. But you got to send that message back home to brag about where you are. It's like what you post up on Facebook. You don't post up the bad stuff. You post up the good stuff, and you paid money for it if you had to. And that's what the Marconi thing was about. So the culture of having a priority over revenue generation and razzle-dazzle marketing feature over the concrete message that the drivers of the ship need to get information to and from ships around them, and navigational information needs to flow, and they made a management decision of incompetence to squash that. Let the guy go to bed. What? We're driving at night. We don't know what's in front of us. And the only way we can know is get ship's reports. Go to bed? That's a bad management decision, right? And that's a culture of allowing bad management decisions. So I would put the root cause, kind of where a bunch of you did, is around that overarching culture and the incompetence of that culture that we can, in retrospect. Now, they weren't incompetent people, probably. They were probably good people, like to just wanted to do a good job. They had a tiger by the tail. They had this awesome thing, and the world was looking at them. And from all outside indications, this was a big success until it sunk.
It just seems like this type of thing is why we have all these regulatory agencies now, because there's somebody overseeing all these possibilities that, that maybe individual owners aren't seeing, connecting all the dots.
That you're exactly right. I remember a plane crash, a DC-10, that crashed in Chicago on takeoff, and it landed in a field of oil tanks full of fuel oil, jet fuel, and other stuff at the airport, and it was an enormous loss of life. And I was in Chicago. I lived in Chicago. I was in Chicago the day of the crash, and I was flying the day after the crash, and they grounded all the DC-10s. And some of you might remember that period when they grounded the DC-10s, and why they grounded them was DC-10 engines are one under each wing, and they're enormous engines, and they're held on with 3 bolts. They're nice big bolts, and they're aircraft grade 8 bolts, and all that. But the federal government says we don't know if we can trust you to go through and do the testing on the integrity of those 3 bolts on your airplane, because clearly United Airlines didn't, and one of the bolts was not. It sheared, and the engine swung down as the plane was taking off, and as it swung down, the aerodynamics were such that it drug it to the bank left, and it went into this refinery area at O'Hare Airport. And so the regulations come because White Star couldn't convince Her Majesty's Navy or whatever that they're going to do the checkouts to make the ship safe. So you've got to have a third party comes in and says you got to do a lifeboat drill, and every time you go whale watching in Catalina Island on a 1 hour little boat, you've got to do a safety thing. Why? Because we've seen tour operators and shipping companies cut corners and not do it. And so a lot of our governmental regulations are that way. But it's interesting to me, this is a little bit of a side note that I'll take. I had a conversation one time here in St. George by happenstance at a restaurant that I was eating at, and this guy was eating at, and this was recently, actually fairly recently. He worked for the National Park Service, and his job, he was here this last spring. We had 2 hikers fall off of Angel's Landing within a few weeks of each other, and they both were fatalities. And of course, anybody that falls off Angel's Landing, it doesn't survive that. And he worked for the National Park Service, and his job was risk assessment, and he was investigating the Angel's Landing trail and the restraints on the trail and the safeties on the trail and all of that to make a recommendation back to the Park Service of was there a new problem. And so he had some papers that he pulled out. We were at Outback Steakhouse, and showed me the papers that he had of all the deaths on Angel's Landing Trail in history, in recorded history that we know of. I can't remember how many it was, but they have them all recorded, and they had they didn't have the fall points documented on most of them because most of them weren't witnessed. They had the body collection points documented, GPS within a foot of where the body was found. Some of them they had correlated from witnesses of where they'd fallen from. And most of them they had a guess. All of them they had a guess of where they'd fallen from, but some they had actual evidence. But what was interesting in that, 2 things that came out of that one was a surpriser for me. was interesting was that he said the Park Service takes a position that it's not our job to make our guests safe. And he said that's contrary to OSHA and all other, things of living in the United States. We have this mindset that the government's making it safe for us, so enjoy it. And he said we try to make everybody understand that nature's nasty, and you are on your own when you walk in here. And if too many people die, we close stuff down. But basically, we don't view it as our job to do that. And I thought that was a news flash to me. It was his opinion, and he was the risk management for all of the National Park Service. He was posted in Maryland, Washington, D.C. And the other thing that was interesting is all of those people that had fallen, I'm too chicken to hike Angel's Landing. I would like to go up there sometime, and if I had the right mountain climbers with me that had the right compassion for me, I might go. But there's spots with the chains where there's chain restraint that you can hang on to because the drop off is so close to the trail. The trail's narrow, crumbly. They've widened it in a couple places with some concrete or boulders, but it's not a wide trail in any place. So passing other people is hazardous there. But the places where the Park Service has put chains, no one has died from those places. All of the places where people have fallen over time has been places that you wouldn't expect people to fall from. They're wider places that look safer. The ones that look the most dangerous isn't where people are falling and dying. I think that was just anecdotal rabbit hole I just took us down. But it's the issue of a lot of the regulation that we have is put there because the corporate cultures are not adequate to do the right thing. And the Titanic, I think, is a classic example of that. The corporate management team did not do the right thing going back 3 years prior to the launch. They were making financial decisions and manufacturing decisions, changing design, cutting corners on materials that kill people. And so having some oversight, if owners can't do it on their own, is not necessarily a bad thing. I'm not advocating Big Brother watching this, but it's a fact of our life that rules and regulations are put in place that say we have to do certain things. You have to put a ground fault circuit interrupt in your kitchen. You just have to. It's because we're idiots with our hair dryers and stuff. We prove from a safety point of view. Anyway, root cause analysis is going back to fix a problem based on what we really believe the problem to be. I'm watching our clock, so let's see what we want to do. Maybe we'll wrap up with one or two of the material things on Titanic, and then we'll go on break, and we'll come back and start on our age, generational kind of stuff. 14 minutes. Some of you have seen, you watched a bunch of videos on this problem. I'll just wrap with one of them. There are hours and hours and hours of videos if you want to start YouTubing and Netflixing documentaries and so forth on Titanic. And I think if you have a chance to go down to the exhibits or whenever they travel around and see some of the relics, it wasn't all Photoshop. There's stuff, whether it's all provable as the original deck chairs from the Titanic that washed ashore in France or not, that seems to be a long way away. But anyway, 10 mistakes, we'll add it to our own thought process. Nope, we won't. Hang on. We'll have to let that warm up for just a second. And when we do go on break, could a couple of you tall guys maybe reattach that poster to somewhere other than in front of the clock? If I'm looking at Jake, you're one of the tall guys. Can you help make that happen? Thanks. Eric,
Kitchen.
thanks. That's right. too loud and I'll kill it pretty much right away if I can.
On the 20th of September 1911, Titanic's sister ship, the Olympic, was steaming down the Solent.
The Olympic is about to set off for her 5th voyage across the Atlantic, and she's sailing through the Solent parallel to a Navy warship called HMS Hawke.
And they were having a bit of a race, so there was a bit of fun going on between the two ships.
Due to the restricted channel, the Olympic tried to manoeuvre out of the way of the Hawke, but it was misjudged.
The Olympic effectively cuts up the Hawke, and he couldn't stop the collision.
The Olympic, like the Titanic, featured a series of internal bulkheads dividing the ship into watertight compartments. Even though the warship had punched a hole in her side, the bulkhead compartments prevented water from flooding the whole ship, allowing her to stay afloat.
I think the spectacular survival of the Olympic from the Hawke collision planted a dangerous idea in people's minds.
If a warship can take you on, and you can just sail home again and get fixed, then it's giving people the wrong idea.
Many would have thought, well, that really does make the ship relatively unsinkable. Invariably, most captains operating on a transatlantic voyage will want to go as fast as possible in the early part of the voyage to have something in hand in case they encounter fog. Fog is very prevalent on the North Atlantic, and it generally means you have to slow down. So by going faster at the beginning, you have something in hand just in case you meet the unexpected fog.
Smith would not have been unduly worried by the iceberg risk. 7 months earlier, he'd been captain of the Olympic when she survived a serious collision.
If you're Smith and you're a Captain Olympic and she survived being rammed by a scary-looking spike on the front of a Royal Naval vessel, then you are not going to be that concerned about what a little iceberg might do to you. Because in your mind, if there's a big iceberg, your people are going to see it and steer away from it.
No doubt the perceived risk of striking an iceberg was so small that it was discounted. But there was the very real risk. If the ship arrived late in New York, there would be a lot of adverse publicity.
Titanic's fireman revealed that a fire had taken hold in the coal bunker in Boiler Room 5.
The fire had been going since Belfast, when Titanic would have sailed with a skeleton crew round to Southampton to make the voyage.
So when the Titanic left Southampton, the fire was already there?
The 3-story high bunker was only finally emptied on Saturday the 13th of April, 1 day before the collision.
The fire was burning for something in the region of about 10 days. It took that long to actually empty the bunker.
The sheet of steel that formed the bunker's rear wall did another critical job. It was part of a watertight bulkhead, a safety feature specifically designed to stop the ship from flooding if she got a hole in the hull.
What 2 of the surviving firemen actually said was that once the coal was taken out of bunker number 5, that you could see how the bunker had warped because of the continued heat it had been exposed to.
So the warping of the steel plates may have weakened one of Titanic's vital watertight bulkheads.
We know from the inquiry into the Titanic disaster that the intense heat of the bunker fire on the Titanic had actually deflected the metal of the hull. And this meant that there was no longer a perfect seal, and in fact a fire-damaged plate in the bulkhead may have been weeping about 1 or 2 buckets of water per hour, even before the collision.
To be a wireless operator on one of these big transatlantic liners, you had to be really good at your job. You had to be really swift at sending and receiving Morse code.
As well as incoming passenger messages, the operators received urgent safety alerts from nearby shipping. They were marked with 3 letters to highlight their importance.
MSG, Master Servicegram, was a priority message that was intended to be sent to the captain, and it was used for things such as ice warnings and the like.
Several ice warnings from other ships earlier that day were marked MSG and were duly relayed to Captain Smith.
Captain Smith saw and received all these messages, so he decided to go a little bit further on, about half an hour additional travel before turning west toward New York.
While Smith entertained first-class passengers to a 10-course dinner featuring oysters and filet mignon, in the Marconi room, the messages were piling up. At 9:52 p.m., another ice warning arrived. This one from the SS Mesaba, a few hours ahead of the Titanic, heading for New York on almost exactly the same course.
So much heavy pack ice and a great number of large icebergs, also field ice.
It was a clear warning that Titanic's new route would take her straight into an ice field bristling with giant bergs. But the message never reached Captain Smith.
The problem with the Mesaba message is that there was no MSG prefix.
Almost an hour later, Titanic received an even starker warning from a ship just 10 miles away. But again, the three critical letters, MSG, were missing.
At 10:30 p.m. on the night the Titanic sank, so only an hour before the collision, a vital message came in from the nearby Californian, who radioed the Titanic to say that they were stopped and surrounded by ice. Now, unfortunately, right at the moment that it arrived, the wireless operators on the Titanic were really busy doing what's called working Cape Race.
Titanic was trying to communicate with Newfoundland over 400 miles away, so it would have had its radio set switched on to a very high level. The Californian, fairly close to the Titanic, when it sent out the message to the ship, it would have come through extremely loud.
It nearly blasted their ears off, so the Titanic replied, "Keep out, old man," which meant, "Please be quiet, we're busy." And sadly, with that, the operator on the Californian went to bed. If you look at this glass of water here, as the pencil is behind it, what you can start to see is the different shapes that are being made. And that's simply because light is bending according to the density of the water behind it. And this was the same the night the Titanic sank, because the air was different densities, and therefore the light was bending. Everyone has heard of a desert mirage. Well, this actually created what we call a miraging haze at the horizon behind the iceberg. So in effect, the haze on the distant horizon actually camouflaged the iceberg in the near ground.
Lookouts Fred Fleet and Reginald Lee have no idea that they are staring into an optical illusion.
If they'd had binoculars, theoretically, they could have seen that base of the berg a little bit earlier, and those few seconds could have been crucial for Titanic.
Titanic's central propeller gives its rudder more power to change direction, but only when it's rotating.
Crucially, when the order was given to stop the engines and then latterly reverse them, the centre propeller would have been stopped.
Cutting power to the central propeller would have stopped it pushing water across the rudder for a few crucial seconds.
We're talking about a marginal situation here, and perhaps the rudder working a few percentage points more efficiently may have swung round just a little bit more to actually miss the iceberg.
Instead, Titanic struck the giant berg.
A rivet is a way of fastening two sheets of metal together. You would take this rivet and heat it up and then put it in through a hole that was punched through the two pieces of metal that are lined up on top of each other. And the rivet is put in through that hole,
and then hammered at the flat end, and that deforms the flat end into another head and fastens these two pieces of metal together.
These rivets hold up well under normal circumstances, but the North Atlantic was unusually cold that night.
Because Titanic was cutting through smooth, icy waters, her hull would have actually been below freezing at the time of the collision.
But that's not all. High-quality steel rivets could only be inserted using a bulky hydraulic machine, which in the bow section was a challenge.
The hydraulic riveter was a very, very large, unwieldy piece of equipment. Where the hydraulic riveter was not so efficient was in the parts which are not straight, the turn of the bilge, or in the bow of the ship, where the hull is more angled. As a result, we had to use manual riveting crews there.
But steel rivets required too much force to be hammered in by hand. So the plates of the ship's bow section had to be fixed together by rivets made not of steel, but iron. And iron had significant drawbacks.
Wrought iron is not quite as versatile as steel, and when it's made in the smelting process, it produces a byproduct called slag, which is just all the stuff in the ore that you don't really want in your iron.
The slag in the rivets can make them even more prone to fracture when struck by a heavy force in low temperatures.
As the iceberg hits the Titanic, that force and that impact has to be absorbed, it has to go somewhere, and it's going to impact the weakest sections of the ship that it's hitting, and those are along the seams, along the rivets. So the ship basically gets unzipped and water floods in, and we know what happens after that.
After the collision, the Titanic came to a stop, and people wondered what had happened. So their natural reaction was to open the portholes and have a look.
As the ship's fate became clear, the crew ordered passengers up on deck, ready for evacuation.
And then, when they went up to the lifeboats, they left the portholes open. As Titanic's passenger accommodation began to dip under the Atlantic, the open portholes meant that water flooded in at a much greater rate. In fact, 12 open portholes would have doubled the iceberg damage to Titanic, and of course there were hundreds of portholes in Titanic's bow.
Standing an average of 12 meters high, the bulkheads weren't tall enough to reach the passenger deck level. A deliberate choice by Titanic's designers. Once the water reaches the top of the bulkheads, they become useless. Water spills over them, flooding all the compartments, and rampages unchecked through the public spaces above. It's the final straw. Titanic's bows dip below the surface, hoisting her stern high in the air.
In the final moment, there were thunderous crashes as the steel was heard down below to be breaking apart at the keel level. And then higher up, there was almost a stampede of passengers towards the stern of the ship.
She rises so high in the water, and then she seems to right herself again, and people think they're saved. Everything might be all right briefly, but all that is the stern snapping off and falling back down. You have all-out chaos and the final death race.
The lights went out, and then the ship bobbed for a bit, and then disappeared forever.
The Titanic's foremost bow section was a collision bulkhead. Like the crumple zone in a modern car, it was designed to absorb the worst of a head-on impact, protecting the integrity of the compartments behind and reducing the inflow of water. Scraping the underside of the ship along the iceberg arguably caused more structural damage than a head-on crash. But Murdoch could never have made that call.
I think we could watch movies on that for a long time and still not have answers. Some of you have watched a lot of them. We're gonna close the chapter on the Titanic. Interesting, but really the purpose of the exercise was to see if we're easily distracted by things that probably was too late to matter. And the ship was launched under conditions that it shouldn't have been launched at. And the ship was, all of the elements that we just saw, except for the design elements, was so what, the binoculars were locked up. And that's not a so what, but it's those things all came together, but they were not the cause. The cause was that incompetence at the top of the organization. So that's we want to include that in our analysis of root causes at work. For us, is the incompetence at the top causing a problem? Not that we are incompetent to the point of being not caring, but sometimes we miss things that we shouldn't miss, we dismiss things we shouldn't dismiss, and we accept things that we shouldn't accept. And those compromises all added up, in this case, to a shipwreck that I think is traceable back to the ownership team of the company that owned the Titanic. With that, we're going to break. I'll see you back in 10 minutes. We're going to talk about generations and watching some videos to do that so they can explain it better than I can, I think. I texted them, and they didn't text me back with your new, they said they said, so you don't need to do it until I get back to you. Yeah, I'm gonna see what it is, it just got. You can hear that, I think. Well, this one might be. More people can ride on it. Cut down some short. Somebody on our team, I just retired. Same principle. Partly funded by the federal government and partly for profit. And you've got to work with it yourself. Basically, it's a your regulation. So it kind of just depends.
You're a couple of lines into it, and continue.
Yeah, absolutely. I would, hit and run training doesn't usually last. It usually has to take working enough. You look at one line and I think it actually had some stuff.
Yeah, because I was talking to one of my foremen, and he sent an email up to the higher ups and said, hey, I think we need to look at company culture and how the workplace works. And all these things that we're talking about in class. And so he and I talked a lot about it. And I stuff in this class, and so I didn't do it, but he sent that email and he got an email back. So apparently they're considering working with NLP on teaching some classes to leadership at the shop. But I'm not sure that I picture a feeling high enough. Which I have mixed. I personally feel like that, but it's not my call, right? But it is what it is. And this woman is I see it every day in one place. And so I'm trying to help, and I think there's just a lot going on.
Yeah, it's the look of the draw depends on who, what the proposing every single time. Some of the people that I've worked with over the years have been fine, and then some have not. But most of the ones that award it, they're all so they come down and do a thing, and it would be just good, but then there's the follow-up to it. And that's good. If you start something, you can't just keep it. But I would come in and talk to them and
Sounds good. It's like something else, but not
We are going to look at stuff on generational things in the workplace, how generations hold us back, how a misunderstanding of generations is a problem in the organization. And so we're going to watch a series of 5 or 10 minute video clips from different points of view, including one from somebody that's 18 years old. And so we will explore a little bit about the impact this has on our workplace. And after each clip, we'll have a tiny little discussion on, the first ones will be informational, but then after that, we'll have a little bit, because to some degree or the other, generational differences impact every one of our workplaces. And in some cases, they hold us back as an organization, cause problems that we shouldn't have, that we have difficulty in managing. And there will be interesting information for all of us in the room, because we all are of one of the 5 generations that's in our current workplace. And we are heavily involved with people in our direct family of other generations, and we know some stuff about them that's weird and they don't think like we do. And that travels over into the workplace. So I think all of us will gather something. My objective is not for us to gather something in our own from our own personal point of view, but also something that applies to our workplace. Because as we work on the issue of talent development, we have to put it in the perspective of the age category of the person that we are trying to help reach a higher level. And if we don't do that, then we'll wind up making some serious mistakes, and we will not get as far as we would like to get in our organization. Maybe we'll make some bad business decisions because of that. So let's take a look, introduce ourselves to the generations, and a little bit more we'll talk about.
Living Generations Explained. Greatest generation refers to the generation of people born between 1901 to 1927. The people of this generation are now 94 to 120 years old. Silent generation refers to the generation of people born between 1928 to 1945. The people of this generation are now 76 to 93 years old. Baby boomers refers to the generation of people born between 1946 to 1964. The people of this generation are now 57 to 75 years old. Generation X refers to the generation of people born between 1965 to 1980. The people of this generation are now 41 to 56 years old. Millennials refers to the generation of people born between 1981 to 1996. The people of this generation are now 25 to 40 years old. Generation Z refers to the generation of people born between 1997 to 2012. The people of this generation are now 9 to 24 years old. Generation Alpha refers to the generation of people born between 2013 to 2024. The people of this generation are now 8 years old and under. These are some of the characteristics of the greatest generation: disciplined, determined, and resilient. These are some of the characteristics of the silent generation: traditional, patient, and responsible. These are some of the characteristics of baby boomers: competitive, confident, and sociable. These are some of the characteristics of Generation X: independent, skeptical, and flexible. These are some of the characteristics of millennials: risk-taker, ambitious, and self-centered. These are some of the characteristics of Generation Z: creative, open-minded, and sensitive. These are some of the characteristics of Generation Alpha: logical, objective, and self-aware. These are some stuffs from the era of the greatest generation: Oldsmobile curved dash, yo-yo, and piano roll. These are some stuffs from the era of the silent generation: Ford Model T, Slinky, and radio. These are some stuffs from the era of baby boomers: Ford Mustang, Frisbee, and record player. These are some stuffs from the era of Generation X: Holden Commodore, Rubik's Cube, and Walkman. These are some stuffs from the era of millennials: Toyota Prius, Beyblade, and iPod. These are some stuffs from the era of Generation Z: Honda S2000, Bakugan, and smart speaker. These are some stuffs from the era of Generation Alpha: Tesla Cybertruck, fidget spinner, and AirPods. These are the iconic hairstyles of the greatest generation. These are the iconic hairstyles of the silent generation. These are the iconic hairstyles of baby boomers. These are the iconic hairstyles of Generation X. These are the iconic hairstyles of millennials. These are the iconic hairstyles of Generation Z. These are the iconic hairstyles of Generation Alpha. These are some of the most popular idols of the greatest generation: Charlie Chaplin, Gloria Swanson, and F. Scott Fitzgerald. These are some of the most popular idols of the silent generation: Elvis Presley, Marilyn Monroe, and James Dean. These are some of the most popular idols of baby boomers: John Lennon, Mick Jagger, and Bob Dylan. These are some of the most popular idols of Generation X: Michael Jackson, Madonna, and Kurt Cobain. These are some of the most popular idols of millennials: Beyonce, Justin Bieber, and Taylor Swift. These are some of the most popular idols of Generation Z: Jungkook, Lisa, and Billie Eilish. These are some of the most popular idols of Generation Alpha: Ryan Kaji, Anastasia Radzinskaya, and Brooklyn Prince. These are some of the most popular cartoons of the greatest generation: Felix the Cat, Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, and Mickey Mouse. These are some of the most popular cartoons of the silent generation: Donald Duck, Tom and Jerry, and Bugs Bunny. These are some of the most popular cartoons of baby boomers: The Flintstones, Pink Panther, and Winnie the Pooh. These are some of the most popular cartoons of Generation X: Scooby-Doo, Doraemon, and Garfield.
These are some of the most popular cartoons of millennials. The Simpsons, SpongeBob SquarePants, and Sonic the Hedgehog. These are some of the most popular cartoons of Generation Z. Adventure Time, Gumball, and Rick and Morty. These are some of the most popular cartoons of Generation Alpha. We Bare Bears, Close Enough, and Solar Opposites. These are some of the most popular fictional heroes of the greatest generation. Zorro, Tarzan, and Flash Gordon. These are some of the most popular fictional heroes of the silent generation. Lone Ranger, Batman, and Zorro. These are some of the most popular fictional heroes of baby boomers. Superman, Batman, and James Bond. These are some of the most popular fictional heroes of Generation X. Wonder Woman, Superman, and Batman. These are some of the most popular fictional heroes of millennials. Power Rangers, Spider-Man, and Batman. These are some of the most popular fictional heroes of Generation Z. Iron Man, Captain America, and Thor. These are some of the most popular fictional heroes of Generation Alpha. Spider-Man, Wonder Woman, and Batman. These are some of the events that took place during the prime years of the greatest generation. These are some of the events that took place during the prime years of the silent generation. These are some of the events that took place during the prime years of baby boomers. These are some of the events that took place during the prime years of Generation X. These are some of the events that took place during the prime years of millennials. These are some of the events that took place during the prime years of Generation Z. These are some of the events that took place during the prime years of Generation Alpha. Don't forget to subscribe for more videos.
So that's just to provide a basis. It's not a great video for our business application, but from that is a little bit of a background. First of all, was there one item on there that you did not recognize?
The global domination of China?
Well, yeah, there was also First Man on Mars.
Yeah.
You know, there's a couple things in there, and Jake would be happy to know that Batman was dominant in 4 generations, right? It's like, wow, that's power.
There was made up cartoons in there.
Say that again?
There was made up cartoons in there.
Yeah, maybe, I don't know. If you Google them up, you'll see that Japan has had a big influence on stuff that we haven't heard of at my age. We haven't anyway. In fact, if you haven't gone into a bookstore in a long time, you're like most Americans, go into Barnes & Noble sometime when you're at the mall and look at the sections, and you'll see a section or two that you don't even recognize at all. And there's a whole section of books there, probably, if you haven't been in a bookstore in a long time. So we get to be kind of in our own little thing. These are arguable in terms of the dominant, players. Maybe there's some made up stuff in there. I don't know. But one of the made up things in Japan, there's a whole stadium named after that. And if you've not ever heard of Beyblade, then that doesn't even sound Japanese, but look it up. And there's, it's just kind of crazy. Anyway, this has a little more foundational stuff, and then we're going to talk about impact in the workplace after we get the
Take a moment to consider that for the first time in human's existence, we have up to 5 generations in one place at the same time. Not only does this bring challenges for society as a whole, in the workplace this makes everything from meetings to dress code a potential hotspot. Hayden Shaw, the renowned author of Sticking Points, clearly explains the importance of uniting generations to ensure success is realised. In this video, we'll explore the 3 main generations currently in the workplace and try to find ways that we can draw the generations closer together. Born between 1946 and 1964, the baby boomers named because of the surge of births after World War II, experienced events like the Civil Rights Movement, the moon landing, Vietnam, Woodstock, television, and the Cuban Missile Crisis, which was as close to nuclear war as the world has ever been. Baby boomers can be best described in the workplace as having a strong work ethic, respectful, and operating from a values-based perspective. Generation X's were born between 1965 and 1980 and was sometimes referred to as the Lost Generation. One of the smallest generational cohorts, Gen X's grew up experiencing the Sony Walkman and the birth of personal computers, the AIDS epidemic, MTV, the tearing down of the Berlin Wall, the Gulf War, and the rise of mobile phones. Generation X's can be best described in the workplace as confident, adaptable to technology, and willingly put in extra time and effort to get the job done. Millennials or Gen Ys were born between 1981 and 2001 and are sometimes referred to as the Me generation. Millennials grew up experiencing the September 11 World Trade Center attack, the Iraq War, the birth of Facebook, iPhone, WikiLeaks, and the Occupy Wall Street movement. Millennials can be best described in the workplace as having liberal and tolerant views, open to new ideas, and confident with technology and the use of social media. The key to working with the different generations is through developing an understanding about what was it that shaped their formative lives and is the reason for why they value what they do. Whilst there are a number of different sticking points or areas that cause the greatest conflict in the workplace, communication, dress code, and workplace loyalty are the ones we hear most often. Communication. Baby boomers learned a lot from their traditional parents and valued the formal communication method. Face-to-face meetings and using the telephone were the preferred means for communicating. Sure, they now email and text, but that's because that's the only way to communicate with the other generations. Generation X's embraced the digital world. They saw the rise of the internet, email, and the mobile phone. Gen X's embraced email as a method of communication, as well as instant messaging. They often feel frustrated because the traditionalists and baby boomers won't just put it in an email. Millennials grew up with interactive communication. News feeds, blogs, retail sites, and social networking all invite their comment. Real-time information is just a click away. Often this means that not only do millennials want to be involved in the conversation, they want to be part of creating something new. Participation is really important. Dress code. Baby boomers grew up in an era that rebelled against the formality of the workplace. They wore casual clothing made out of natural fibres and grew their hair long. When they entered the workplace, they adapted somewhat to the dress code of the traditionalists, but in their personal lives, it was all about the casual living. Generation X's grew up in the casual mindset and introduced the world to sandals, denim jeans, and t-shirts. Whilst they wanted to remain casual, their numbers were too small to influence the baby boomers, so the transition never really happened. Millennials grew up with many different versions of dress codes and saw their dress as a way to make a personal statement. Flip-flops became the norm. They don't see how their choice of clothing has an impact on their abilities to do the job. Whilst they prefer to take a more personalised approach to their clothing, they want to be taken seriously. So for the moment, they will conform when they have to. Loyalty. Baby boomers grew up in a period of economic decline, the end of World War II, and an explosion in population. Jobs were hard to come by, so if you could secure one in a big corporation, it paid to be loyal. Job security meant that you could put food on the table, pay the electricity bill, and look after your family. On the other hand, Gen X's were growing up in a period of economic growth, globalisation, and a skills shortage. This meant that there were more opportunity to move onwards and upwards. Organisations were also less loyal to their employees, and Gen X's knew it. Gen X's learned that if their company didn't take care of them, then they had to take matters into their own. Millennials grew up in a world where sports stars would switch teams for more money, celebrities would be selling you Coke one month and Pepsi the next, global leaders would flip-flop on their principles in the lead up to an election. The rise of the gig economy and the casualisation of the workplace also meant that you could be expected to move jobs more frequently. Finally, millennials will be living longer than any generation, and they don't want to end up like the traditionalists and baby boomers who had to wait a long time to enjoy life. Now that we know about the generational differences, how do we draw them closer together? The first step is to openly discuss these differences. Often the generation differences are only discussed in a stereotypical manner, like baby boomers are anti-technology, Gen Xers are slackers, and millennials are entitled. Rarely do we sit down with each generation to explore what our sticking points are and how that's impacting the way that we do our work or our client base. The second step is to recognise why generations operate the way they do. When we talk generations, we talk about all the things each generational cohort does or does not do. What we don't do well is explore why this is the case. Exploring why each generation prefers to operate their way helps us to create a shared understanding of what's important to them. The third step is to appreciate the common needs of each generation. It doesn't matter what generational cohort you belong to, we all have common needs. Whether it's to be seen as competent, respected, or just recognised, it's these commonalities that we can leverage off to develop shared mutual working arrangements. Finally, we need to work to accommodate each generation. When we get each generation to explore the ways that they can accommodate to the needs of others, we are more likely to achieve success. It may be that no one has to wear a tie unless they're meeting a client for the first time. It could be that emails are fine for general workflow, but for performance-related issues, a face-to-face conversation must take place. When we create a plan that accommodates the needs of all, we create a truly inclusive workplace. The only way to be successful in drawing the generations together is by exploring where each generation has come from, why they value what they do.
Keep up that conversation of introduction here. A little bit of, from a management perspective, we talked about interacting and a little bit of the fundamental differences. You know, I don't know how the alphas that are 8-year-olds or under can have a hero yet or a thing, so they left that out. We're looking just in the workplace.
How to manage 5 generations in the modern workplace. Hi, I'm John and I've been an HR manager for many years now. It may surprise some to know that there are as many as 5 generations working at a single workplace. With workplaces being more age diverse than ever before, it's important to remember that different generations have different needs. With several generations working side by side, it's essential to consider how their typical work styles and needs might differ, since each generation has distinct experiences and perspectives, especially when it comes to technology. With the right insights, though, you can give individuals the right tools to maximize productivity and get your teams collaborating more effectively. Generation 1, Traditionalists. People are retiring later today, and there are still many people born before 1945 still working. Traditionalists are civic-minded and loyal. They're team players. They tend to stick with one employer for as long as possible. They like to work as part of a structured team, with a focus on longer-term projects, and although they're not afraid of technology, they tend to rely more on desktop computers, landline phones, and fax machines. Traditionalists need robust voice capabilities and traditional desktop applications to be more productive. Generation 2, Baby Boomers. While baby boomers tend to stay in the same field for longer than millennials, they switch employers more than traditionalists. Boomers focus on individual performance and are driven, with their identity defined by their profession, and they care deeply about climbing the organizational ladder. Baby boomers are less likely to use social media at work or use smartphones compared to younger generations. This generation relies heavily on email, so make sure your organization is equipped with proper email tools to allow this generation to be more productive. Generation 3, Generation X. Gen X has begun to replace boomers in managerial positions in recent years, and they're more independent than their predecessors, value authority less, and are more likely to walk away from an inflexible workplace. Since this generation embraces technology in the workplace, including smartphones, email, laptops, and tablets, it's essential to implement video conferencing and team-based digital workspaces to meet their flexibility requirements. Generation 4, Millennials. This generation is the driving force of today's workplace, and they crave interaction, feedback, and collaboration, and are even more informal than Gen X. Millennials are strongly driven by a sense of purpose and crave continuous workplace learning and growth. Since this generation grew up fully immersed in digital technology, text, IM, and social are their primary modes of communication. This generation prefers to communicate electronically, so make sure you implement the proper tools to allow them to do this. Generation 5, Generation Z. This generation is just beginning to enter the workforce, but is the largest cohort of the US population and the most ethnically diverse. This generation is fast-paced, and they tend to be independent and competitive. Most of this generation's job decisions are based on how tech-savvy a workplace is, but they also prefer face-to-face communication at work. This generation appreciates technology that provides a personal experience like video meetings. Now that you know how to make each generation in your workplace more productive while catering to their unique preferences, you're ready to make all generations in your organization work seamlessly together. If you want to learn more about how to manage 5 generations in the modern workplace, click the link.
All right, now moving a little bit deeper, how the generational stereotypes, because what you're seeing there may not be true about me. I'm a baby boomer, but all of those things may or may not be true. Yeah, I'm wearing a jacket, that fits, right? My hair's longer than most of yours. I think Kelly's got repeat. But all the rest of the stuff doesn't necessarily add up, right? Maybe we're all flexible. And yet those stereotypes can be problematic, or we can leverage them to advantages. And that's kind of what we want to look. This is a TED Talk, looking a little bit more of how those stereotypes may be holding us back.
So for the first time in America's modern history, we have 5 generations interacting at work. The veterans born between 1922 and 1943 are known as the greatest generation, the matures, the silents. They're known for their self-sacrifice, respect for authority, and work as its own reward. The boomers came shortly after, born between 1944 and 1960. This is a generation characterized by hard work. In fact, we can thank this generation for the term workaholic. They appreciate competition, they love effective communication, and they're thinking towards retirement if they haven't retired already. Generation X is known as the lost generation, or the latchkey generation, born between 1961 and 1980. This is the smallest generation, sandwiched between boomers and the big millennials. They have more parents were divorced in this generation than any generation prior. They also are the first generation to tell us about work-life balance, and the first to really ask for that in the workplace. And then millennials, everybody gets a ribbon generation, born between 1981 and 2000, never knew a time where technology wasn't present in the home. They're incredibly pragmatic, they're hopeful, and they're determined. They think they're going to change the world. In fact, I believe they're going to do it. They might be a little bit idealistic sometimes, but in just the last several years, we've seen millennials overtake Generation X to be the most represented generation in the workforce. In fact, more than 1 in 3 people in the United States labor force is a millennial. And soon to join us there, Generation Z, born since 2000, are our high school interns, are soon to be high school graduates. Now, if you open any internet browser, look at Amazon, search any of your favorite search engines, you might assume there's a literal war in the workplace, right? We see blog topics like 17 reasons why millennials are the worst generation, and why baby boomers have ruined it for everybody, or bridging the great generational divide. It's like turning into this West Side Story, like boomers come in one door, millennials come in another door of the lobby, they just fight with each other all day, complain, go home, do the same, come back to work, right? Well, so what if I told you these generations may not exist? So I've been spending some time thinking about this and researching this, and fellow researchers and I aren't exactly sure that these generations are real. And in fact, if we can agree that these groups even exist, we certainly don't agree who belongs in them. And they span something like 20 years. So at every point in history, a 1-year-old and a 20-year-old are said to share the same value system, to want the same things at work, to have the same stereotypes working for and against them. And in fact, different areas of the world define these generations differently. So we can't even compare generations across various areas of the world. And these stereotypes about each generation have in a lot of ways created this self-fulfilling prophecy that people begin to act as if they're part of that generation because we've said out loud that generation is real. I'm not so sure that it is. And in fact, this idea of generations has become deeply embedded in United States culture. When we talk generations, people know exactly what we're talking about. In fact, people have a lot of thoughts and feelings about each of these generations, and I'll tell you how I know this. I did the thing that every red-blooded American and pre-tenure academic does, and they have a question. I Googled some stuff, and this is what I learned. You know, so Google is based on algorithms, and they provide you with commonly searched terms or suggested hits based on what other people are searching surrounding the same topic. And it gave me a really good sense of what people think about each of these generations. Take a look. I learned that baby boomers are conservative, that Americans think they're stupid. The worst generation, they're angry, apparently they're racist, and they're so important. Looking at Generation X, I learned Generation X is a cynical group, okay? They're angry. They're known as the lost generation. We know this, okay? They're the smallest generation. Apparently they're stupid too, okay? And mostly they're frustrated with baby boomers. All right, millennials, this is what I learned about us. So we're obsessed with food, okay? We're also stupid, okay? We're lazy, we're sensitive, we're fired, we're also hated, and we think we're important. And perhaps the most terrifying search result on the internet, Generation Z is screwed. Okay, so for 5 years, I've been talking to leaders and followers across a wide variety of organizations. And this is what I've come to realize. Generations haven't become part of the conversation. Generations have become the conversation at work. And what I've learned is that we're working under the assumption that those Google results are true. And so, what I think is that organizations are now desperate to figure out how to manage the multi-generational workplace. Manage it, right? We manage all sorts of things. We're preparing for this wave of millennials to come to work. So we prepare for hurricanes, right? We prepare to take the MCAT. We prepare for natural disasters. Why are we preparing for 23-year-olds to come to work? I've talked to these organizations and I've heard amazing things that they're doing to create a workspace for everybody to get along and to have autonomy and to feel like they're thriving. But I've also heard some really incredibly harebrained ideas about how to navigate the multi-generational workplace. Are you ready? This is what I saw. I visited an organization and they adopted this idea that if you can see it, you can be it. A really important concept, but I think they blew it. They put pictures on the walls of the ideal multi-generational workplace because if you can see it, you can be it. Or like this one. Like, I don't even want to work here. You don't get to wear color here, apparently. And HR seriously has problems with people jumping in heels. I promise you that, okay? I talked to an organization who recently decided against putting a ball pit in the break room because that's how you retain millennials. We're 30, not 3. And in fact, I know a young, at the time, millennial who was told that if she wanted people to take her seriously, just because she was a millennial, she would have to do this, wear shoulder pads. Yes, people younger than her and older than her wouldn't take her seriously unless she wore shoulder pads. Straight out of the 80s, can't even buy them anywhere, shoulder pads. This young woman had 2 graduate degrees. This young woman was me. And this is the best we came up with? How to navigate the multi-generational workplace is shoulder pads? So, this is also what I've learned talking to organizations that employ a wide range of people of various ages. We are so much more similar than we are different, and we're hearing this consistently. People want work that matters. They want flexibility. They want support. They want appreciation. They want better coffee. But none of these things are tied to a generation. Now, sure, we see small differences in what people want. We know 20-year-olds and 60-year-olds go home and do different things. They have different values, at least when it comes to things happening outside of work. But I think what's happened is that this focus on generational cohorts, these groups of people, has created a space where we've just forgot that people are people. And to know who they really are, who we really work with, we have to figure out how to better navigate this multi-generational workplace than ball pits. calling one of those idealist millennials, but I think we can get there. And I don't think the idea is too terribly difficult. What if we radically, simply, not easily, meet people where they are? Individualize our approach. I've never met a generation. I've had a lot of conversations with people who happen to identify with a specific generational cohort. I know that 80-year-olds text message and 23-year-olds crochet blankets. None of these things are stereotypical of that generation, right? Nilofer Merchant, she's a thought leader in innovation. She tells us we have to meet people in their onlyness. That is that spot in the world where only we stand as a function of our unique history, our experiences, and our hopes. But this requires flexibility and curiosity. And what happens when we meet people in their onlyness? Only the spot in the world that they stand. We learned that that boomer who's just acting angry at work all the time is scared because he's worked every day since he was 16 years old. And in a Monday, sooner than he can imagine, he'll never go to work again. He's got plans. It's going to take like a week and a half to do all the things on that retirement list. But then what? What if you give a little bit of grace to the person that might be a little scared? Or that Generation Xer who has 4 drop-offs, 3 kids, 2 hands, and is just trying to keep the wheels on the bus. Sure, maybe she's a little aloof at work. Maybe she's a little independent. Maybe she's exhausted. Or that millennial who asks for a raise after 2 months because they're entitled. Well, maybe it's because that generation has more debt than any generation before them coming out of college, and they just need the money to keep going, to pay rent. And suddenly, when you meet people in their onlyness, that spot in the world only they stand, we're not talking about a generation anymore. We're talking about Jim or Jen or Candace. And so here's my challenge to us. Pick a person, just one, and explore their onlyness. And then learn. And then in the moments where it's appropriate, teach. And figure out what they bring to work that no one else can bring to work, because that's what makes work richer. And then do it again. And do it again. And then someday, we're not working with generations anymore. We're working with people. And so to really understand the beauty of the multi-generational workplace, I think we just have to meet people where they are. And that doesn't require that we unpack and live there with them. But we might find, at least on occasion, it's a beautiful place to visit. And so I think there's just no need to argue about which generation is the most angry or the most entitled or the most so obsessed with food. We all come to the classroom to work, back to our homes a little bit tired and a little bit tattered sometimes. Maybe let's just do our best to humbly meet people where they are, how they show up that day, generation and all. And in those moments where it can feel a little bit like intergenerational warfare, I think we can at least all agree that shoulder pads aren't the solution. Thank you.
So we noticed a few things in the first few videos that we saw. First of all, they don't agree on the years. Did you notice that? There's a little bit difference on the years. And because what she pointed out here is her theory, maybe there isn't really such a thing as generations. It doesn't say that on your birth certificate. It just says your name and the date, but it doesn't say that I am a baby boomer. That's a contrived term, right? And there are things that are about me because of where and when I grew up. And there are things about you because of where and when you grew up. My grandmother lived through the Depression, and the way she had to live through that was differently than I've seen anybody have to live in my lifetime. But that's because I haven't spent that much time in third world countries. And I haven't spent that much time in unfortunate areas within the United States. I've been fortunate, I've been lucky. So putting those things all in perspective and now building on it, we have some time for some more thoughts. There are some generational differences that are there no matter what. We're going to get into the perspective from some younger people than me, and we'll start with this one.
In this video, you'll learn 5 tips to overcome generational differences at work. In 1945, following World War II, Economists, businesses, and policymakers began using a new unit of measurement to study demographics, the labeled generation. The baby boomers, those born between 1946 and 1964, were the first generation to adopt a widely accepted label. They achieved their generational label due to the spike in birth rates following the war. Generations, which are typically a 15 to 20 year span, are formed by significant events like world wars, the moon landing, terrorist attacks, or advances in society, the internet, technology, during multiple years of an age group. It's important to note that generational spans are getting shorter because of increased level of exposure to significant events thanks to the internet and our hyper-connected world. Why do generations matter? 52% of workers say they're least likely to get along with someone from another generation. An individual's age is one of the most common predictors of differences in attitudes and behaviors. Generational differences lead to disengagement in the workplace, which can lead to poor communication, decreased productivity, leadership miscues, and more. So here are 5 tips to overcome generational differences at work. Number 1, awareness and appreciation. Before bridging the generational gap, one must be aware of how generations are formed and then must appreciate the differences that exist across generations due to the different time period that generation came of age. Make it a priority to consider the viewpoint of other generations when interacting and working across generations. Number 2, be respectful. It was Ralph Waldo Emerson who said, "Every person I meet is my superior in some way, and in that I learn from them." We can learn something from everyone. The key is to be open to learning from anyone, no matter their age. You will build a stronger connection across generations if you approach the individual with your hat in your hand. This posture of respect is also likely to open others to explore how they can learn from you. Number 3, find common ground. Common interests are the foundation for strong relationships. Establishing common ground allows for a deeper connection to be forged. Leadership expert John C. Maxwell was spot on when he said, "It's difficult to find common ground when all you're focused on is yourself." Focus on others and strive to find common ground. Keep in mind that beyond generations, we're all humans with the same needs and aspirations. We all want to be fairly compensated, to achieve a healthy work-life balance, and the opportunity to fulfill our potential. Leverage these similarities to find common ground. Number 4, slay your assumptions. It's easy to assume how millennials want to be led, how Generation X prefers to collaborate, or how baby boomers want to communicate. Don't let your assumptions blind you to reality. Instead, ask how different generations prefer to be led, collaborate, or communicate in the workplace. Then adapt your approach to best connect with that generation. Number 5, pursue cross-generational interactions. The best way to continue learning about other generations and what they value and how they view life is rub shoulders with them. Explore ways at work or volunteering or through an association to begin interacting with different generations. In conclusion, all generations bring value to the table through their unique perspective and experiences. Finding ways to leverage their uniqueness will be a 21st century competitive advantage.
Another thought, and now another British perspective. I think another thought.
Thank you very much. Leaders of the past would love to be in our shoes. Leaders of the past would love to have the opportunities that Generation Z have to live beyond the box. Every generation has had individuals who lived beyond the box, people who did things differently, and subsequently changed the world. Whether it be through music, running a business, or leading a movement, gripping change, these individuals transformed the way humans behave. Not many of us in this room would have lived through the groundbreaking events of the 20th century, but we live with and benefit from the change they brought about. I'm sure we all admire the works of Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks, how both they and the civil rights movement as a whole gripped the world, creating meaningful and lasting change. They are just two examples of people who live beyond the box. So here's a question for you. Can you imagine the impact leaders of the past would have had if they were born within Generation Z? Generation Z are the cohort born between 1995 to 2010. We've become the first limitless generation. A generation who no longer need to create a full strategy in order to reach and influence thousands of people. We just create a tweet. Think of the power this holds. Every single Gen Zer has a platform with which they can voice their opinions and ideas. I mean, you only need to open your phone and you'll probably find any one of your friends talking about a trending news topic as if they were some sort of expert. This concept alone takes our entire generation and puts us beyond the box. Why? Well, because my parents grew up being told, you'll be seen and not heard. Whereas I'm growing up in a generation where I can reach 1,000 people like that. So instantly our generation is super different. But what does this mean for a Gen Zer? Well, it means that for the first time ever, we are able to pursue our passions at any location, at any time, with any identity. But most importantly, to any uncapped level. Let's take a look at the world of music. Firstly, learning music. It used to be super expensive. It leaves us without surprise that here in the UK, the Royal College of Music in London has the highest number of privately educated students of any university in the UK at 55.9%, which is staggering compared to the national average of 7%. But this is changing. Now, education is more accessible than ever before. Who here hasn't been educated by the School of YouTube free of charge? If you have a passion, you can pursue it. Education and money is less of a restriction. But looking at music specifically, there are other seismic shifts that have caused the industry to change. For example, previously, in looking to make a career out of music, you needed a label. It was a fundamental requirement. It required you to reach out to the right people to then have your music invested in. Only then could you go out to the masses, where you would be hidden behind a PR team. They created your narrative. They pushed for you to have sets on TV and radio. They grew your following. You, the artist, were just a small cog in the machine. You were firmly positioned within the box. But now we're seeing Gen Zers grow huge followings and gain huge success with music from their bedroom. A bedroom that's probably in their parents' house. But these individuals aren't just artists. They're lyricists, publishers, tour manager, PR team, backing vocals, bass guitar. They do it all, and they don't even need to leave their bedroom. So no longer are we just a small cog within a machine. We are the entire ecosystem in which the machine is placed. I'm sure we all have a dozen or so friends who regularly upload music to streaming sites, probably for fun. What's really interesting is out of those dozen, you've probably got 2 or 3 who receive tens of thousands of views. Which means that for the first time ever, a young person is able to derive an income from their passion. I mean, previously if you were 16 and you wanted to make an income from music, let's say, you'd have had to go busking on a street corner, practically begging for cash. But now we don't need to ask. Our passions, in this case music, are being seen by enough people to be deserving of an earning in its own right. And I want to reiterate, this is not uncommon. One example would be a friend has had a piece of music go platinum on a streaming site, and this has led to him winning a prestigious place at the world's leading music school. He was just pursuing his passion, using the opportunities available to him, creating music in a niche area that he enjoyed listening to. And now, he creates music on a professional basis. But it's not just in music where we are following our dreams, and our dreams are subsequently gaining us a following. But we're seeing Gen Zers pursue modelling, acting, journalism, comedy, even athletics. And these are just some examples of passions and potential careers that Generation Z are pursuing while still in school. But it goes beyond just careers or just making a bit of extra pocket money. Gen Zers are now even starting businesses. Did you know that the cost of 10 business failures today is the same as 1 business failure 10 years ago? So the roadblocks for Gen Zers in terms of starting a business have been lifted. One challenge that even I faced was, you look young, right? So people judge you based on what they see, not on what you say. They look at you and instantly write you off. because just by looking at you, they're going to presume you have no real world experience, whatever that means. But Gen Z is now, thanks to online platforms, able to show their passion and knowledge for a field without age discrimination. But it goes beyond that. It's not just how we look, it's how we're programmed. It's not just the 2D, it's the 3D. We are programmed so differently to any past generation. We are growing up super savvy. We are all marketing experts, and we've all been developing a personal brand from the minute we joined social media. So what does this mean? Well, the new world has been moulding us into these mini trailblazers, and we don't even realise it, because to us it's all natural. So it probably leaves us without surprise that 70% of Gen Z, when surveyed, said they want to start their own business, and statistically 15% of them will do it before they leave high school. But the real amazement comes from those who are going beyond enterprise to even starting charities. Can you believe it? Young people starting charities. Now, starting a charity is something which seems unimaginable, and securing government funding, that's a different world away. But everywhere you look within Generation Z, there are young people doing it. Every imaginable issue, a Gen Zer is running a campaign of some sort. Ocean plastic, mental health, animal rights. You name it, there is a Gen Zer promoting and unifying the voice of young people. But why are they doing it? Is it because for the first time ever, we've actually got a platform to voice our opinions? Or is it because for the first time ever, we are being brought up, told, you can do this, voice your opinion, we want to hear what you think. So when we look at stories like Greta Thunberg, maybe we're left without surprise that Greta Thunberg, a leading climate change activist who recently spoke to RMPs in the UK, calling for fast and real action, explaining that Britain has an absurd response to climate change, even arguing that our future has been solved for us. Now, Greta Thunberg started the School Strike for Climate movement in August 2018, and this has since taken off globally. Let's just take a step back for a second. Greta Thunberg, a 15-year-old at the time, started a movement, initially by skipping school, and 6 months later, this movement has taken off to become a worldwide phenomenon. Not only is Greta mobilising thousands across the world, but she's influencing millions via the internet, she's influencing discussions in multiple parliaments around the world, and influencing new movements to form all around the world due to her inspiration. Greta is the perfect example of a Generation Z campaign gone well. Generation Z campaigns are a groundswell of genuineness. Now, thousands of new Gen Z campaigns do start every single day, because it's so easy to do. So, a lot of what is produced is often empty. By that I mean it lacks substance. So, how many times have you seen a company use charity as a vehicle in order for them to gain hype and sales for their company? So, if you're a Gen Zer or someone looking to attract Gen Z, you need to be really careful because Gen Z are more astute than ever. It's said that we have an 8-second attention span, meaning that anything generic simply does not stand out. If they BS, we swipe on. So if you're a musician looking to gain a following, or a business owner looking to gain sales, or maybe you're the leader of a movement wanting to grip Generation Z, you need to be socially aware, promoting a 100% authentic message, and that message needs to be consistent. Because if it's not, Gen Z will see right through you. Some people may question, is this opportunity for everyone to create a campaign on mass actually a good thing? But in my eyes, it's truly awesome. Never before has there been more competition. But what that means is, if you have the ability to stand out, that means whatever you're doing is really special. It's something which maybe is a one-in-a-generation campaign. So if you're standing out, people are buying into your movement, people are supporting your motion, your potential reach is now infinite, thanks to mainly platforms like social media. So young people now have the opportunity to do bigger things than ever before. Small people can now do incomprehensibly big things. So when we, Generation Z, come together for a collective cause, we don't just leave the box behind, we blow it out of the water. But that brings me back to my original question. Can you imagine the impact leaders of the past would have had if they were born within Generation Z? Could the suffragettes of 1907, who recruited 50,000 members in the UK, have instead recruited 5 million across the world? Or could the bus boycotts of Montgomery in 1955 have instead been the bus boycotts of the United States of America? The world is changing at an ever-increasing pace. The fabric of life progressed more in the 19th century than the 2 previous centuries combined. The 20th century, even quicker still, led first by industry, then technology. And in the latter half of the century, obviously there was a huge push for equality across the board, namely with the civil rights movement. But now, we're progressing at a quicker rate than ever. Since the year 2000, in just the last 19 years, we have seen the development of cars that drive themselves, computers that teach themselves, currencies sustained by algorithms with no further human input. We've even had medical discoveries, notably with stem cell research. And arguably the coolest, we've taken a photo of a black hole. So you name it, it's happening. We are living rapid change. But not only are we living rapid change, we're driving it. There are some queries. If it's that easy, why isn't every Gen Zer a multi-millionaire? Or a leading activist? In fact, if Gen Z are so impressive, why are they only influencing government and not running government? Maybe it's because we're not currently utilising the opportunities we've got at our fingertips en masse. Sure, some people are using them, and we're seeing more and more young people creating and driving change than ever before, from a younger age. But how can we encourage more to make the most of this opportunity? Are you? Are you using your opportunity to live beyond the box? It's tricky. By no means do we have the perfect hand. We have new expectations. We are expected to be wise beyond our years. We are expected to be a force for good. And we are expected to be a global citizen, all whilst being ourselves. By no means do Generation Z have the perfect hand. We have it no easier than any other generation. We just face different challenges. But then again, you could argue that other generations don't have the same opportunities that Generation Z have. So surely we're in a better position if you look at it that way. Now, I really do want to emphasise this is not a social media talk. I'm not here to say that social media is what has made Gen Z so amazing, because it's way more than social media. But what online platforms have allowed us to do is we can now create, learn, try, fail, and publish in an easier way than ever before. Which is meaning that we're developing skills and traits that kids our age have never historically been able to develop. Because these are traits you would have only been able to develop once you're in the working world. So this new world around us is allowing us to mould into more mature human beings, meaning that we're able to pursue our passions in a more impactful way than ever before. Generation Z, you have no limits. Have a look at the leaders of the past. Whether it be the modern day leaders, Emma Gonzalez, Mary Cockney, or Greta Thunberg, or compare them to Thomas Edison, Rosa Parks. Those kind of leaders, all of them had one commonality: passion. They had a genuine passion for their field. So if you as a Gen Zer have a genuine passion for your field, embrace this opportunity you've got to live beyond the box. Because I have no doubt that leaders of the past would love to be in your shoes. Thank you very much.
So, comment or two about that I think is appropriate. Of what we've learned so far, maybe some comments from all of us as we think a little bit about what we've seen so far. First of all, Generation Z, we'll call it Generation Z, because we like Z's better than Z's in America. 1997 or later, up to 2012, for birthday. Some of you in this room were born after 1997, and you are part of Generation Z. If we go to accepting generations as existing. Now, this wasn't about generations as much as it was about an advent of technology and access. And left to its own devices, the tendency is do that for your hobby pursuits if you're in a band or, going for a particular sport or something that you like. But when it comes to going to work, you're going to come to work for the man who's going to try to convince you that a Model A or a horse and buggy is the right way to go. And when in fact, those of us that aren't in that group maybe should understand a little bit of what the Generation Z naturally recognizes, naturally has access to, and doesn't consider it a feat. I consider it a feat to record anything. It's hard for me to remember to hit the record button, much less publish it. And we have YouTubers in St. George that are buying at age 20-something, $3-4 million houses in Little Valley. Drive up and down Little Valley and look at the age of the kids playing in the driveway. And you'll see that some of them aren't even old enough to have kids yet. They've chosen not to have kids yet. And you go, okay, some management teams somewhere are harnessing these talents and skills. And so I think part of the talent development is recognizing the ease of access. The stuff that seems very difficult to my mom and dad seem easy to me, but the same things that seem easy to you may seem difficult to me because of my background, my constraints, what I've been taught. This is what you have to do to start up a business. And I've talked to two of the Generation Zs that are in this room about starting up your own business. And my continued advice is listen to some of this stuff and then filter it along with some people that have been there, done that. And so I'm thinking what we're hearing is that any one of these generation preferences that we've heard about so far, all by themselves, lead to isolation and limitation. Don't you think that? That if we could compile the strengths of the various generations, recognize what they can bring to us, that reality that I taught an AM STEM mechanical engineering course at the university here for a while when they were starting up their engineering program, and the high school students were, they'd go, they'd do something in class, and tomorrow they've got it published up with a video and drawings and a 3D model that they printed overnight on their 3D printer in their bedroom. And all of a sudden, this prototyping to take a product to market was not even considered, a difficult task to these high school kids. It was something they were doing for fun. And it was something that my generation, to do that was going to cost $10,000 and take a month. And it's something that happened overnight to the high school kids, and you can all identify with that stuff. And so the world is changing, our business is changing, and how is Generation Z, how are we recognizing the assets that they're bringing to the workforce at Wilding Walbert? How are we recognizing at S&S Steel? That there are things potentially that can pivot our business based on the assets and the life aspect perspective that our younger people in our workforce bring to us. To some of us, it's he was expecting in that speech the fact that very young people were very interested in charitable organizations and making a difference to disadvantaged or impoverished persons or cultures or areas, and he's viewing that as something that's unexpected. That's supposed to come from the old people when they are retired and nothing else to do but look at their fortune. The Spencer Eccles Foundation that has retired and passed away and have tried to leave endowments and help this institution has received monies from them. The Gail Miller Foundation, these foundations of people that have lived their careers, cashed out, and are now trying to give back. And what they're saying there is, we've got people that are thinking like that are 3 generations younger. And we're not harnessing. We're not capitalizing that. We're not incorporating that into our business. And if you don't believe so, look at your webpage. I look at our webpage at Dixie Tech here, and it's only recently that we're making it a little bit better, but it's been abysmal since day one. We teach it, but we're not letting the people that are really excelling at it develop it. We're constrained by state risk managers and state people that say you can't do this and you can't do that, and they're all old people. They're all with their rules and regulations, and instead of making something vibrant to who are our customers. I mean, you guys are the oldest students in the college here. Most of the college is populated by kids right out of high school, right? And some of you are almost out of high school, and some of you are just in that category. But most of us in this room have been out for a while, and this college is catering to this group and soon to the Generation Alpha, who speak differently, right? Who are attracted differently, who won't want. They won't want a text. I'm still trying to talk people out of sending emails and sending text, and we're seeing all these technologies advance and change, aren't we? So, a couple more thoughts. We still have to work together, but so far my assimilation of the pieces of information that we've got is that we've got some assets here from a talent development perspective that are cross-generational. Maybe there is no such thing as true generational stereotypes. Maybe we're just people, like Lee was saying in her speech, and that we ought to meet people where they are in their ownliness, their uniqueness. I like that idea. But certainly the idea of thinking, I'm the most experienced, seasoned senior person in the company, and my team of seasoned, experienced people, we will make the decisions and guide where this company is going. If we do that, we're missing big opportunities from the Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z, and sometimes Gen Alpha. All right, let's look at one more, and then we're going to go home. And we are going to look at this one.
So I remember the first letter that I realized had value. Wasn't A or B or C, although those are important, and we're going to talk about those. It was S. So if you think back to pre-K, first grade, kindergarten, S stood for satisfactory on your grade cards, right? I loved to be satisfactory. I craved it. Loved it. Hated to be unsatisfactory. I was unsatisfactory always in math, handwriting, still am, right? But I loved to be satisfactory because I knew with every satisfactory grade that Mamaw would give me $1 value, right? Here's the reality though. Our life is made up of letters that constitute some semblance of value to us. So you learned letters to read, write, and speak. And unfortunately, we have values of letters that are ascribed to us as individuals in our workplaces, especially. I'm talking most specifically about generational letters, so X, Y, and Z. Now, take me for instance, I'm a millennial, a member of Generation Y, and this is not a woe is me speech, although that would be very millennial of me, right? But I have been stereotyped, I've been typecast, my friends have been as well, but if you think about it, you have been too. Boomers, you are professionally competitive. You are career loyalists, you're a wealthy consumer base. Unfortunately, you had no balance. You would work 80, sometimes 90-hour weeks, and your X and Y kids looked at you and said, well, you don't want that, right? Generation X, you're autonomous, you're independent, but you're cynical. And sadly, sometimes too quiet and often forgotten. Generation Y, millennials, we are entitled, perfectionist, apathetic, right? All traits that tend to bug our boomer and X bosses. And then Generation Z, you're entrepreneurial, tech savvy. And we recognize, though, that this tech savviness may lend itself to a little bit of instability. But all of these are stereotypes, right? So how do we rise above? I always tell my students, you are worth more than a grade. You have an inherent value, a dignity. How dare me take that and ascribe that in a box, right? And define you according to that particular letter. But unfortunately, we do it all the time. So I want to argue today, or at least position today, what I'm calling generational agnosticism in our workplaces. Basically, that we look at people as individuals who are competent and capable on their own without ascribing these generational identifiers to them even before they set foot into their workplaces that may or may not fit. So I want to just kind of take you back as we look at job data over time, and I'm talking decades worth of job data. Workers have always pretty much wanted the same thing. We wanted balance, right? We wanted to know that we don't have to work 7 days a week for 15 hours a day. We want fair compensation, although fair is kind of defined differently depending on who you talk to. For the most part, workers will say, at least they have over the last several decades, that they want to be challenged, that they don't want to be bored when they go into their workplaces, and then ultimately they want to be recognized. They want to know that at the end of the day, they're getting a pat or a back, a promotion, or some form of recognition for a job well done. It's not rocket science, right? So several years ago, Peter Drucker supposedly said that culture eats strategy for breakfast. So I want to share with you just a couple ways that you, hopefully, can become a generation agnostic employee and how your workplaces can become generation agnostic work environments. So first, let's talk about what it means to be a generation agnostic employee. And you've heard some of these before, but I think it's good to remind ourselves as we live in the midst of all of these identifiers and generational differences that there really is nothing new under the sun, right? So first, work hard. This will never go out of vogue. It will always separate and distinguish. And we forget that often. That at the end of the day, work ethic counts. And it counts towards our merit and our worth in our organizations. Number two, work smart. So what I mean by this is that we should strive not to be problem finders or problem complainers, but instead to be problem solvers. And at the end of the day, nobody is indispensable, but some people are harder to replace than others, right? And number three, we want to make sure that we're working relationally. And this is something that transcends generational differences. It doesn't matter what age you are. You can be kind. You can be compassionate. You can treat others the way you would want to be treated. Working relationally allows us to look at people not just as a generation, right? And ascribe those stereotypes to them, but it allows us to look at them as individuals with an inherent value, a dignity. So those are three things you can do to be a generation agnostic employee. So what about being a generation agnostic workplace? Because this is actually a little bit harder. So I harken back to Peter Drucker, culture eats strategy for breakfast. It really does. So number one, can you establish a culture where your people are able to buy into the mission and vision, where they're able to latch onto that, to hear what you say and be a part of something bigger than themselves? It's a big deal, right? Number two, we want to make sure that we're establishing fair conditions that are equitable, that are balanced, that allow for mobility. We don't necessarily need to cater to a particular age group or generation. We just need to make sure that whatever we have created has some semblance of equitable structure. And number three, we want to make sure that we have established some semblance of clarity. Again, being able to look at people and say, this is what I expect of you. That doesn't necessarily have to be a millennial trait. We always say we have these grand expectations of clarity. I would argue everyone wants to know what they're supposed to do, right? And clarity, again, transcends generational differences. It allows employees to meet and then exceed expectations. So in sum, as we think about what it means to be generation agnostic, it means we don't necessarily latch on to generational identifiers. We don't necessarily sit there and allow them to define us, and we don't cater as an organization to a particular age group. But instead, as employees, we work hard, we work smart, we work relationally. As workplaces, we establish a culture that people can buy into, that they believe in, right? We establish conditions that are fair, and we establish some semblance of clarity of expectation. You know, at the end of the day, we need to rise above generational stereotypes and engage beyond age. Your life is made up of letters, but your identity does not have to be defined by them. Thank you.
All right. That was too many videos in one. Low, sorry about that. But I thought that was the best way to talk about generation, because my tendency, my default setting is from my baby boomer point of view, and to tell you to all be like me and manage like me, and that's not good. And so we heard it from various perspectives, male, female, various age groups, a little bit of background about some of the fact that we're all born in different times and places. We all grew up listening to the kind of music that was popular in our place, wherever that was. And that has an impact on who we are now. And that's just a simple thing. It does not make us superior, inferior, or different in ways that matter. It makes us different in ways that enrich us. It makes us different in ways that can make our teams and our company stronger. So, in the remaining minutes, we're going to go around the room. One thing that struck you about generations, positive, negative, something you can apply back at your work, or something you need your work you wish they would do. Just one thing. I'm going to start with the Gen Z in the back corner. Go this way around the room. We're going to end up with Eli, and then we'll be done for the day.
I don't know, really, because I've seen a lot about all the generations. Like, it's kind of normal in high school for everybody to talk about it. And the only thing that I just, focused at all is that my generation seems to be the judge going up by not the one before us, but everything past that. Just seems like we judge just the technology, people, not hardworking, everything.
So the good sides are good, and the bad sides are not fair, right? I mean, basically, and I think that may be true of all of us reflecting that. The good stuff is cool, the bad stuff, that's not fair. It's not universally true at all. But you probably will have two businesses running before you're 25 years old, and others would just wish they will.
I noticed that a lot of the stereotypes for our generation aren't really true. Like it said the Idols or something. It said Billie Eilish and then
It was
two
all
other
just
ones. I
musicians.
didn't even know who those people were. I was like, what?
It was saying in the prime, so not that you grew up with, that's what that was a little, it kind of shifted half a generation for each of those things, but I agree with you and others that they didn't necessarily match. I don't know that I agree 100% with those. What else?
Also, I mean, just an example, like where I work, most of our customers are baby boomers. They're older, and I have so many people will be like if I say, like, oh, I'm sorry, could you repeat that or something, or like just different things. If I ask them to repeat something, or I don't understand what they're saying, they'll be like, oh my god, are you a millennial? I'm like, no. And they'll be like, oh, then you're younger. Oh, that's even worse. Like, they get after you for being young, and I'm like, that doesn't mean I can't do my job. Just repeat your card number one more time. Like, sorry. Yeah.
Wow, interesting.
Communication, honestly, just because I see it all the time at work. They'll hire these super young kids, and then they'll always put him with like our lead star. He's like 55, and we're just like at the times I see them try to communicate with each other, just how they both speak like completely different languages, and just ends up clashing a lot of times. That's what's definitely stuck out to me.
Interesting. Okay.
I guess I just bring it back to personal experience. I'm actually leading a multi-generational area. I have a 73-year-old man doing delivery, and I have a 55-year-old man doing customer service. And I have a couple millennials and stuff working in installations, and I've had millennials working in installations. It hits it right on the head on both for most parts, generally speaking, about like their traits and stuff. And if you can identify that, you can kind of speak with them a little better and identify with them and gain respect and loyalty that way. No matter what it is, what generation you're going with, working with. But I don't agree with the age groups, but I do agree with you saying where you're from and stuff like that, because I was born in 81, but I identify more with the generation behind me, because I was born and raised in Cedar City, Utah, about 5 years later than everybody else. And like mom and dad are very traditional, so it's even further back.
Yeah.
So, that's kind of what I got from it. And how I'm going to utilize this is I'm hiring new customer service agents. They're going to be younger, but they have to communicate with people that are older and younger. So
Seems like Callie's good at that.
I'm quitting, they're getting ruthless. I'm putting my 2 weeks on there.
Josie.
A lot of the stereotypes are pretty head-on, and it's kind of like the idea that like I can make a joke with those two that you wouldn't understand.
I'm sure.
You know, things like that. But at the same time, like certain stereotypes, like how Gen Z are lazy. Like I know some lazy people that would do anything to get out of anything. But at the same time, like doesn't every generation have that? And also, I think it's more of like a putting up with less type thing. Like I personally know a lot of people who walk off the job site just because they got attitude. You know. I feel like it's more of a personality.
That's-
How you raise.
That's a good thing to take to our management, in our management backpack. That the stereotypes are interesting, and in some cases may give us a clue, kind of a heads up on how to make connections. But they're also not right.
So I come from like multi-generation as well. I mean, our groundskeeper, he's baby boomer. My property manager is Generation X, and then tech is Generation X2, and then we have 3 millennials, myself included. And I guess I'm just trying to learn that Generation Z, I feel like, does have a lot of pressure when we're talking about how there's people that are 21 with Lamborghinis and sort of like, I'm trying to understand the standards, how being 20 and being a millionaire, and then what kind of pressure that puts on for yourself, and trying to figure that out. I mean, being a millennial, I definitely felt like when it was my turn to enter the workforce, there was already the, lazy millennials, so then I felt like because of that pushed me to come in, when I do 16-hour days, show up on time, and so I feel like that pressure kind of made me a better worker in the workforce, but I know that Generation Z, I feel like has a lot more pressure, I don't know if it's just my personal opinion, to, like I could envision myself at 16 or 17 thinking that I'm going to run 2 businesses and do all that sort of stuff. So I guess I have more respect for Generation Z doing that, and I'm trying to currently understand it as well. But,
I think that I'm going to add mine based on what you're saying. I think one of my takeaways is I have more respect for the whole spectrum. Everybody brings something really powerful to the team, and the stereotype just box them into what the hazards are. I got respect for what people bring, and that's pretty cool. I think we need to never lose that.
I thought it was interesting when she said they're hit with their Generation Z or X or whatever, just based on that 20 years. So whether you're at the beginning or the end of it, you're still categorized there. And you could be closer to the previous generation. And even the guy talking about the music and what they have at their fingertips, I mean, that really kind of opened my eyes a little bit to, it's amazing how many people they can reach, how quickly information gets out there. So I thought that was pretty interesting. For our own workplace, I think most of us are the older ones that are the managers, so I think that would probably help a lot of them to see the younger generation coming in, what they could be capable of.
Shame on us for not utilizing that and harnessing that incredible potential that's there.
I thought it was interesting when they were talking about Generation X, how once they started getting into the workforce and were more into it, they were frequently changing jobs more often than previously, and how that generation was smaller too. I didn't know that. I didn't know that was a smaller generation. I've got I don't want to say I have a wide range of people, like coworkers and employees at work, but like my other general manager in Washington, I'm 22 and he's 64, so and I work with him a good amount, and I just had an employee that works with me to start working over there, so I don't want to say it's difficult talking with him, but it has some challenges. A good majority of the employees that work in my store except for a couple of them are around my age, maybe just because I hire people around my age, but I do have a few of them that are, I got one that's she's 51, and I've noticed that she is a lot more professional and feel like works harder. Always wanting to clean something, always wanting to do something. But the communication part I feel like is the most interesting, because also, you know, talking with my owners as well, they're 49 and 52, so trying to speak with them, and like I feel like I go with what you were saying too, where, you know, I came into the workforce and it was almost like, oh man, look at these guys, they're not wanting to work hard or anything like that, and trying to put in as many hours as I can, and working, you know, long shifts. To me, I love working long shifts because it's kind of just important to me, and yeah.
Yeah, a couple of you are the youngest guys on the team, and that's interesting place to be in, and the communication is certainly a challenge in from a generational point of view, Joelle.
I'm Gen X, and when I think about it, I worked with a lady who basically trained me in what I do, and worked with her in the same office for like 25 years. She just died this year, so I'm gonna cry. She was in her 90s, but I worked with her until she was in her 80s and got glaucoma and couldn't drive anymore. But so I've worked with people in that age range. She was awesome. Like, she would take somebody in high school and value their opinion and ideas just as much as anybody her age, probably more. So I don't get this generation thing at all. I have my oldest daughter is 30. She's a dental hygienist, and then I have 2 sons in between, and my youngest is 23, and she's a surgical tech. All my kids are amazing, and I cannot understand. I probably identify with them as much as anybody else. The younger, they're so smart. They have so much to offer. I don't understand the discrimination between it. But I know there are grouchy old people. I know that. I don't understand it though,
Well,
because there's so much in every generation.
We need to
admire.
teach that more and more to people around us, and we can make a difference one person at a time on that. But you've nailed it right on that. Eli.
I think for me, the one that impacted me the most was just the generational agnosticism idea. I just, working with plenty of people, I mean, I've seen millennials that are great workers, I've seen Gen Xers that are phenomenal, work hard, show up every day on time, and I've seen baby boomers that are just the most disrespectful, rude, lazy people that you've ever seen. And so, I mean, looking at it from a generational point of view, I just don't get it. Like, plain and simply, I mean, it just doesn't make sense to me. Because you have people that are coming out of, like, I could come out of this class, and I'm 24, and I might have learned plenty of useful knowledge, and someone that's a baby boomer that's like, well, I've been here for X amount of years, and I don't care about your opinions, and, you know, maybe they're right, maybe I'm lacking some life experience, but maybe they're wrong, and there could be improvements in a company, maybe my voice can be heard. It's just, I've experienced more generational friction between older people than with younger people. I feel like younger people being more understanding and willing to listen, in my experience.
I think that my experience matches that as well, but it's my experiences in it as well. I'm on overtime, so I'm gonna let everybody out. Thank you much for chipping in and participating, and we will be on recruiting and retention next class on Tuesday. Have a great weekend.